The stagecoach door swung open to reveal a town that looked like it wanted to swallow her whole. Eleanor Grant clutched her father's final letter, the one that said she had family here, that she'd have a home. But standing in the dust of Silver Ridge with nothing but a battered trunk and borrowed hope, she was about to learn the cruelest truth. Sometimes the people you're counting on are already in the ground. This is the story of a girl who lost everything twice, and the cowboy who taught her that sunset isn't always an ending. Stay with me until the very end, and drop a comment with your city name. I want to see how far Eleanor's story travels across this world of ours. The wheels of the westbound stage had been grinding through Colorado dust for 3 days straight, and Eleanor Grant had spent every mile of it trying not to think about what she was leaving behind. Philadelphia felt like another lifetime now. The brick townhouse on Chestnut Street, the carefully tended rose garden her mother had loved, the parlor where she'd taken tea with girls whose biggest worry was whether their silk gloves matched their afternoon dresses. All of it was gone. Sold to pay her father's debts after the consumption finally took him last winter. She pressed her forehead against the coach window, watching the landscape transform from cultivated fields to something wild and untamed. The mountains rose in the distance like broken teeth, purple and imposing against a sky so vast it made her chest ache. Everything here was bigger, harder, more honest in its brutality than anything she'd known back east. "Silver Ridge, miss." The driver's voice cut through her reverie as the coach lurched to a stop. "End of the line!" Eleanor gathered her skirts, good wool but dusty now and travel-worn, and accepted the driver's weathered hand as she stepped down. Her boots hit the street and dust plumed around her ankles. The town spread before her like a rough sketch, all wooden storefronts and muddy thoroughfares, so different from Philadelphia's cobblestones and gas lamps that it might as well have been another country. "Your trunk, miss." The driver heaved her belongings onto the wooden sidewalk with a thud that seemed to echo her heart. Everything she owned in the world, reduced to one battered leather trunk. "Thank you." She pressed a coin into his palm, one of her last, and watched him climb back onto the coach. Within moments, he was gone, the stage rolling away in a cloud of dust, and Eleanor stood alone in a town where she knew absolutely no one. Except she did know someone. Uncle William, her father's younger brother who'd come west 15 years ago, chasing silver and cattle, who'd written faithfully for a while before the letters grew sporadic and finally stopped. But he was blood. He was family. And when her father's lawyer had helped her draft that letter, the one explaining her circumstances, asking if she might come stay until she found her footing, she'd prayed harder than she'd ever prayed for anything that he would say yes. No reply had come before she'd had to leave Philadelphia. But she'd taken that as a sign to come anyway. Desperation had a way of making you brave, or at least making you move when staying still meant starvation. The afternoon sun beat down as she looked up and down the street, trying to get her bearings. A saloon door swung open, releasing a burst of laughter and the sour smell of whiskey. 2 men stumbled out, already drunk though it couldn't be past 4 o'clock. They noticed her standing there and their eyes tracked over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Well now, what do we have here?" The taller one grinned, revealing gaps in his teeth. "Ain't seen a lady like you in Silver Ridge before." Eleanor lifted her chin. "I'm looking for William Grant's property. Could you direct me?" They exchanged glances, and something passed between them that made Eleanor's stomach drop even before the shorter man spoke. "Grant? Old Bill Grant?" "Yes, my uncle." The tall man's grin faded. "I'm sorry to tell you this, miss, but old Bill died last month. Pneumonia took him fast." The words hit her like a physical blow. Eleanor's hand found the lamppost beside her, steadying herself. That's not possible. I wrote him. I told him I was coming." "Mail's slow out here," the shorter man said, his voice gentler now. "Real sorry for your loss, miss. Your uncle was a decent man when he was sober." When he was sober? The words hung in the air like smoke. Eleanor tried to process this new information, tried to reorder the world that had just shifted beneath her feet again. Uncle William was dead. The one person who might have helped her, who might have given her a place to land, was in the ground. "His property," she managed, her voice sounding far away even to her own ears. "What happened to his ranch?" The men exchanged another look. "Banks got claim to most of it," the tall one said. Old Bill had debts. Drank more than he ranched toward the end, if we're being honest. Place is still standing, I suppose, but it ain't much good to anyone now. Eleanor nodded numbly. Thank you for the information. She turned away before they could see the tears threatening to spill over. Behind her, she heard them shuffling off, their voices dropping to murmurs. Probably talking about her, about the foolish girl from back east who'd come all this way for nothing. The street swam in front of her eyes. Eleanor blinked hard, forcing the tears back. She would not cry. Not here, not in front of this rough town full of strangers. She'd survived her mother's death when she was 12. She'd survived nursing her father through his final months, watching him waste away until he was nothing but bones and rattling breath. She'd survived selling everything, leaving the only home she'd ever known. She would survive this too. But as the sun began its descent toward the mountains and the shadows grew long across Silver Ridge's main street, Eleanor had to admit she had no idea how. The hotel, if you could call it that, wanted 50 cents a night. Eleanor counted out the coins from her reticule and knew she had enough for perhaps 3 nights, maybe 4 if she didn't eat. After that, nothing. Her hands trembled as she signed the ledger, her careful Eastern penmanship looking absurdly delicate against the rough paper. The room was small, barely large enough for the narrow bed and washstand, but it was clean. Eleanor set her trunk at the foot of the bed and sat down heavily, the day's travels finally catching up with her. Through the thin walls, she could hear the sounds of the town, horses in the street, men's voices, someone playing a fiddle badly in the saloon below. She pulled out her father's last letter, the paper soft from repeated handling. His handwriting had been shaky by the end, but the words were clear. William will take care of you. He's blood. He won't turn you away. But William was dead, and blood or not, you couldn't get help from a grave. Eleanor folded the letter carefully and tucked it back into her reticule. Then she removed her hat, unpinned her hair, and lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling where water stains bloomed like strange flowers. Somewhere in this town, she would find work. She had to. She was a banker's daughter, educated, well-mannered. Surely someone needed a clerk or a teacher or even a housekeeper. But even as she thought it, she remembered the way those men had looked at her on the street. This wasn't Philadelphia. The rules were different here. Women were scarce, and a woman alone was something else entirely, either a commodity or a problem, but rarely just a person. Sleep came in fits and starts, punctuated by the sounds of the town's nightlife. When dawn finally broke, Eleanor rose, washed her face in the basin, and dressed in her most practical dress, a brown calico that had seen better days but was at least suitable for work. She pinned her dark hair into a severe bun, looked at herself in the small mirror above the washstand, and barely recognized the tired woman staring back. "You've come this far," she told her reflection. "Keep going." The cafe sat at the end of Main Street, a squat wooden building with steam rising from its chimney and the smell of frying bacon drifting out the open door. Eleanor had walked past it 4 times yesterday, noting the help wanted sign in the window, before she'd finally gathered the courage to enter. Inside, the place was packed with miners and ranch hands, men in dusty clothes hunched over plates of eggs and potatoes. The noise was deafening, the clatter of dishes, the scrape of chairs, voices raised to be heard over the general din. Behind the counter, a woman with graying hair pulled back in a bun moved with efficient speed, pouring coffee and calling orders back to the kitchen. Eleanor waited by the door until the woman noticed her. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and the woman's gaze traveled over Eleanor's neat dress, her carefully pinned hair, her obvious foreignness to this place. "Help you?" the woman called out. Eleanor threaded her way between tables, conscious of the eyes following her. "I'm looking for work. I saw your sign." The woman, she introduced herself as May Harper, owner and operator of Harper's Cafe, looked her up and down with sharp, assessing eyes. "You ever waited tables before?" "No, ma'am, but I'm a quick learner and I need the work." May snorted. "I can see that. You've got desperate written all over you, honey. No offense, but that's the truth." She poured coffee for a customer without looking, her movements automatic. "The work's hard. 6 in the morning until 8 at night, 6 days a week. You'll be on your feet the whole time, and these boys—" She jerked her head toward the dining room. "They ain't always gentlemen. You got thick skin?" I'll develop it, Eleanor said. Something in her voice must have convinced May, because the older woman nodded. All right, $1 a day plus meals. You start tomorrow morning, 5:30 sharp. Don't be late, and don't expect any coddling just because you're new. Thank you. Eleanor felt something loosen in her chest. $1 a day. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep her off the streets, enough to give her time to figure out her next move. I won't let you down. We'll see, May said, but there was a hint of kindness in her eyes. What's your name, girl? Eleanor Grant. Grant. May's eyebrows rose. Any relation to Bill Grant? My uncle. Ah. May's expression softened slightly. Heard he passed. Sorry for your loss. He was a good man when the drink didn't have him. She paused, then added, You got a place to stay? The hotel for now. May made a disapproving noise. That'll eat your wages faster than winter eats firewood. Listen, I got a room above the cafe, nothing fancy, but it's clean. You can have it for 25 cents a week, taken out of your pay. Deal? Eleanor could have kissed her. Deal. Thank you, Mrs. Harper. May. Everyone calls me May. Now get out of here and get some rest. Tomorrow you're going to earn that $1. The work was every bit as hard as May had promised. Eleanor's first day passed in a blur of burned fingers, dropped plates, and muscles screaming in protest. She'd thought herself strong enough, thought her years managing her father's household had prepared her for physical labor. But this was different. The cafe never stopped. Miners coming off the night shift flooded in at dawn, demanding breakfast. Ranch hands appeared at midday, eating enough to feed 3 normal men. Evening brought another rush, and by the time May finally locked the door at 8 o'clock, Eleanor could barely stand. Not bad for a first day, May said, counting out the day's receipts. You didn't cry, didn't quit, and you only broke 2 plates. I've seen worse. Eleanor looked at her hands in the lamplight. They were red and blistered, the soft skin of a banker's daughter transformed in a single day. Does it get easier? Your hands will toughen up, May said. Your feet too. Rest of it. The rush, the noise, the men being men. That you just get used to, I suppose. She handed Eleanor a bowl of stew from the pot on the stove. Eat this. You'll need your strength. The stew was simple. Beef and potatoes and carrots. But after a day of serving food without eating any, it tasted like the finest meal Eleanor had ever had. She ate slowly, savoring every bite, while May bustled around the kitchen preparing for the next day. You really Bill Grant's niece? May asked, not looking up from the bread dough she was kneading. Yes, ma'am. Figured you'd go out to the ranch, try to claim it. Eleanor set down her spoon. I thought about it, but those men on the street said the bank owned it now, that Uncle William died in debt. Bank owns most things around here if you listen to them, May said darkly, but ownership's a funny thing out west. Sometimes possession matters more than paper. She shaped the dough into loaves with practiced efficiency. That ranch of Bill's, it's still standing. Been sitting empty for near a month now. Bank ain't done nothing with it yet. What are you suggesting? May finally looked up, her eyes sharp. I'm suggesting that if Bill's only living relative showed up and took possession, well, that might complicate things for the bank. Might make them negotiate instead of just seizing property. Might mean you'd have something more than just table waiting in your future. Eleanor felt a flutter of something in her chest. Hope, maybe, or just the reckless desperation of someone with nothing left to lose. I wouldn't even know where to begin. Ranch is about 5 miles out, due west. Anyone in town can point you the way. May returned to her bread. I'm not saying it'll be easy, but from where I'm standing, easy went out the window the moment you stepped off that stage. Might as well fight for something that matters. That night, in the small room above the cafe, Eleanor lay awake and thought about May's words. The ranch, her uncle's land, her family's claim, however tenuous, to a place in this harsh country. She'd spent the last year watching everything slip through her fingers. Her mother's jewelry sold to pay for medicine, her father's books auctioned off for pennies on the dollar, the house itself claimed by creditors. She'd had no power to stop any of it, had been swept along by circumstances like a leaf in a flood. But maybe here, in this rough territory where possession mattered more than paper, she could dig in her heels, could claim something and hold it. The idea was absurd. She was alone, penniless, barely surviving one day of waiting tables. What business did she have trying to claim a ranch? But then again, what choice did she have? Work at Mays until she was old and broken? Hope some miner or cowboy decided she was pretty enough to marry despite her lack of dowry? Let the West grind her down until she was nothing but another sad story of an Eastern girl who came seeking fortune and found only hardship? No. May was right. If she was going to fail anyway, she might as well fail trying to claim something that mattered. Over the next 3 days, Eleanor fell into a rhythm. Wake at dawn, work until her body screamed, collapse into bed, and do it again. Her hands developed calluses, her feet stopped hurting quite so much. She learned the regulars' names, learned who wanted extra coffee, and who would leave a penny tip if she smiled just right. She also listened. In a place like Mays, where men came to eat and talk and escape their own hard lives for an hour, information flowed as freely as the coffee. She heard about the bank manager, a man named Cornelius Webb, who'd come from Denver 2 years ago and who had his fingers in half the properties in Silver Ridge. She heard about the Silver Queen mine closing down, putting 50 men out of work. She heard about drought and cattle prices, and which ranchers were one bad season away from losing everything. And she heard about her uncle. Old Bill was a good man, one grizzled ranch hand told her when he found out who she was. Came out here when there was nothing but rocks and rattlesnakes. Built that place with his own hands. Shame what happened to him. The drinking? Eleanor ventured. The man nodded sadly. Lost his wife to fever the first year. Never got over it, I reckon. The land was all he had left, and even that started slipping away when he couldn't keep up with the work. He looked at Eleanor with something like pity. You thinking about going out there? To the ranch? I am. It's rough country, miss, and that property. Well, it needs work. Needs someone who knows cattle and horses and can handle the weather when it turns mean. No offense, but you don't look like you know much about any of that. He was right, of course. Eleanor had never even touched a cow, let alone raised one, but something stubborn was growing in her chest, some seed of determination that refused to be logical. I can learn, she said. Sunday was her one day off. Eleanor woke before dawn anyway, her body too accustomed now to the early hours to sleep in. She dressed carefully in her riding skirt, bought second-hand from the general store with her first wages, and walked out to the livery stable as the sun painted the mountains gold. The stable owner, a taciturn man named Boone, looked skeptical when she asked to rent a horse. You know how to ride, miss? I do. That much was true. Her father had kept a small stable in Philadelphia, and she'd ridden since childhood, though side saddle on groomed trails was rather different from what she was proposing now. Where you headed? The Grant Ranch. Boone's eyebrows rose. Bill Grant's place? My uncle's place, Eleanor corrected gently. I'm his niece. Ah. Boone studied her for a long moment, then nodded. All right. I'll give you Daisy here. She's steady, won't spook easy. Follow the west road about 4 miles, then look for the turnoff marked by a split pine. Can't miss it. But miss, you should know. I know it's been abandoned, Eleanor said. I know there are debts. I'm going anyway. Boone almost smiled. Wasn't going to say that. Was going to say there's been someone out there this past week. Saw smoke from the chimney couple days back. Might be squatters, or might be someone the bank sent. Just wanted you to know you might not be alone. Eleanor's heart skipped. Thank you for the warning. For the, you want I should come with you? Boone offered. Just to be safe? She was tempted, but pride, perhaps foolish pride, made her shake her head. I'll be fine, but I appreciate the concern. The ride out took longer than she'd expected. The west road was barely more than a wagon track, rutted and rough. Daisy picked her way carefully, and Eleanor let her set the pace, using the time to take in the landscape. The vastness of it still stole her breath. Endless rolling hills dotted with scrub brush, the mountains looming ever larger, the sky so blue it hurt to look at. This was her uncle's land, or had been. Somewhere in this wilderness he'd tried to make a home. Tried and failed, ultimately, but at least he'd tried. The split pine appeared like Boone had said, a lightning-struck tree marking an even rougher path heading north. Eleanor guided Daisy onto it, and within a quarter mile she saw the ranch. It was smaller than she'd imagined, more humble. A single-story house with a covered porch, weathered gray by the elements. a barn that leaned slightly to one side, a corral with sagging fences. But beyond it, stretching out toward the foothills, was land, acres and acres of it, empty and waiting. And Boone had been right. Smoke rose from the chimney. Eleanor's hands tightened on the reins. She should turn back, should come back with the sheriff, or at least with someone who knew how to handle squatters. But something pushed her forward, the same reckless determination that had brought her here in the first place. She dismounted at the edge of the yard, tying Daisy to what remained of a hitching post. The house looked both abandoned and lived in at once. Overgrown grass around the foundation, but fresh boot prints in the dust of the porch. "Hello?" she called out. "Is anyone here?" Silence. Then the creak of a door. A man stepped out onto the porch, and Eleanor's breath caught. He was tall, lean, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent his life outdoors. Dark hair touched with gray at the temples, sharp eyes that assessed her in one quick sweep. He wore work clothes, canvas trousers, a worn cotton shirt, a leather vest, and there was a revolver on his hip that made Eleanor's mouth go dry. "This is private property," he said, his voice low and rough. "You're trespassing." Eleanor lifted her chin, channeling every ounce of confidence she didn't feel. "Actually, you're the one trespassing. This land belonged to William Grant. I'm his niece, Eleanor Grant, and I'm here to claim what's mine." The man's eyes narrowed. He stepped off the porch, moving with the kind of casual grace that spoke of strength held in check. Up close, Eleanor could see he was younger than she'd first thought. Perhaps in his early 30s, though the sun and hard living had etched lines around his eyes and mouth. "Bill Grant's niece," he repeated, as if testing the words. "He never mentioned you." "We lost touch," Eleanor admitted. "But blood is blood. I have a right to be here." "Rights." The man's lips quirked in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Interesting concept. Bank seems to think they have rights to this place, too. You got a deed? Proof of ownership?" "I have a telegram informing me of my uncle's death. I have letters he wrote to my father. I have—" She faltered, because what did she have, really? Nothing but the word of a dead man's daughter. The man studied her for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he stepped aside. "You'd better come in. Name's Jonas Hale. I worked for your uncle the last 2 years." Eleanor followed him into the house, her heart pounding. The interior was dim and dusty, furnished with simple wooden furniture that had seen better days, but someone had been living here. There was fresh coffee on the stove, a bedroll in the corner, the smell of wood smoke and bacon. "You've been staying here," she said, "for about a week now." Jonas poured 2 cups of coffee without asking if she wanted any. "After Bill died, the place sat empty. Bank sent someone to assess it, but they haven't moved to sell yet. Figured I'd keep an eye on things until they did." "Why?" Eleanor accepted the coffee, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "What's this place to you?" Jonas was quiet for a moment, staring out the window at the land beyond. "Your uncle gave me work when I needed it. Didn't ask questions about where I'd been or what I'd done. Just said a man willing to work deserved a chance to prove himself." He turned back to her. "I owed him. Still do, I suppose." Something in his voice told Eleanor there was more to the story, but she didn't push. "The bank. How much does he owe them?" "Near as I can figure, about $2,000. Eleanor felt the number like a blow. $2,000 might as well have been $2 million for all her ability to pay it. That's impossible." "Yeah." Jonas took a long drink of his coffee. "I figured. So what's your plan here, Miss Grant? You going to charm the bank manager into forgiving the debt?" She bristled at his tone. "I'm going to figure something out. This land is my inheritance, however burdened. I'm not just going to hand it over without a fight." "A fight?" Jonas shook his head. "You know anything about ranching? About raising cattle, or breaking horses, or surviving a Colorado winter when the snow pile's 6 feet high?" "No," Eleanor admitted. "But I can learn. I'm stronger than I look." He studied her with those sharp eyes, and Eleanor had the uncomfortable feeling he was seeing right through her, the calluses just forming on her soft hands, the desperation she was trying so hard to hide, the fear that she was in over her head. "You're stubborn, I'll give you that," he said finally. "But stubborn won't keep you alive out here." He set down his coffee cup. Look, I'll be straight with you. This place is barely hanging on. Your uncle let it go to seed these past few years. The fences need mending, the well needs work. The cattle, what's left of them, are scattered across 3 counties. Even if you could somehow pay off the bank, you'd be looking at a year of backbreaking work just to get this place functional again. Then I'll do a year of backbreaking work, Eleanor said. I have nothing else, Mr. Hale. No family, no fortune, no prospects. This ranch is all that's left of my uncle, all that's left of any connection to my father. I may fail, I probably will fail, but I have to try. Jonas was quiet for a long time. Then, unexpectedly, he nodded. All right, I'll help you. Eleanor blinked. What? I said I'll help you. Your uncle gave me my start. I'd like to see his bloodkin keep what's his. He held up a hand before she could speak. I'm not doing it out of charity or because I think you can't manage. I'm doing it because it's right. Bill deserved better than having his life's work parceled off to pay for whiskey he drank trying to forget his pain. If there's a chance to save this place, even a slim one, I figure we owe it to him to try. We, Eleanor repeated softly. We. Jonas extended his hand. Partners, I suppose. Until the bank takes it, or until we somehow pull off a miracle. Either way, at least we'll have tried. Eleanor looked at his outstretched hand, work-roughened, scarred, honest, and then at his face. There was something in his eyes, some mixture of grief and determination that mirrored her own. He'd loved her uncle, she realized, not as family, but as something just as important. She took his hand. His grip was warm and strong, and for the first time since stepping off that stagecoach, Eleanor felt like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't completely alone. Partners, she agreed. Until the bank takes it, or we pull off a miracle. Jonas's lips quirked in what might have been the beginning of a smile. You should know, Miss Grant, I don't believe in miracles. Good, Eleanor said. Neither do I. We'll just have to make our own. They spent the rest of the morning walking the property, Jonas pointing out what needed fixing and Eleanor taking mental notes of everything. The list was overwhelming. Fences, the barn roof, the well pump, not to mention the cattle that needed rounding up and the hay that needed cutting before winter came. How much time do we have? Eleanor asked as they stood by the sagging corral fence. Before the bank moves? Hard to say. A month? Maybe 2. Webb likes to let things ripen before he picks them, if you know what I mean. Makes people desperate, makes them more willing to accept whatever terms he offers. Jonas tested one of the fence posts and it wobbled alarmingly. But we do have one thing in our favor. What's that? You. At her confused look, he elaborated. Webb thought he was dealing with the dead man's debts, easy to collect or write off. Now Bill Grant's niece shows up, claiming inheritance. That complicates things legally, gives us leverage to negotiate, maybe buy some time. Eleanor felt a spark of hope. You think it will work? I think it's worth trying. Jonas pulled a bent nail from his pocket and hammered it back into place with a rock. But you need to understand what you're signing up for, Miss Grant. If we do this, if we really fight for this place, it's going to be hard, harder than anything you've done so far. You'll be working dawn to dusk, no breaks, no mercy. The town will talk, Webb will push back, and there's a good chance we'll lose anyway. Eleanor looked out across the land at the mountains rising in the distance, at the empty spaces waiting to be filled with something. Purpose, maybe, or just the simple satisfaction of having tried. I understand, she said, and I'm still in. Jonas nodded slowly. Then we start tomorrow. You'll need different clothes. Can't mend fences in a dress like that. Boots, too, proper ones. And gloves, though your hands will still blister. I'll manage. I believe you might. This time his smile reached his eyes. Against all reason and common sense, Miss Grant, I believe you just might. As the sun began its descent, Eleanor rode back to town, her mind churning with plans and fears in equal measure. She'd done it. She'd claimed her uncle's ranch, found an ally in Jonas Hale, and committed herself to a path that was probably foolish and definitely terrifying. But for the first time since her father died, she felt like she was moving towards something instead of just running away from loss. May was waiting when she returned to the cafe, eyebrows raised. Well? How'd it go? There's a man living there, Jonas Hale. He worked for my uncle. I know Jonas, May said, her expression softening. Good man. Quiet. Keeps to himself, but good. He giving you trouble? No. Actually, he's offered to help. Eleanor sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. May, I'm going to try to keep the ranch. I know it's crazy. I know I'll probably fail, but you have to try, May finished. I get it, honey. And for what it's worth, I think old Bill would be proud. She poured Eleanor a cup of tea. You'll still need to work here, though. Can't fight banks on an empty stomach. I know. I was thinking, could I work half days? Early mornings, then out to the ranch by noon? I'll take a pay cut, whatever you think is fair. May considered. Tell you what, you work mornings, breakfast rush, 4 hours, but you work hard. 75 cents a day instead of $1. Deal? Deal. Eleanor felt tears prickling her eyes. Thank you, May. For everything. Don't thank me yet. You got a hard road ahead, girl, but at least you won't be walking it hungry. That night, Eleanor sat at the small desk in her room and wrote a letter to the bank, formally notifying them of her claim to her uncle's property as his sole living heir. The words came slowly, carefully chosen. She had no legal training, but she'd helped her father with correspondence for years. She knew how to sound confident even when terrified. When she finished, she sealed the letter and set it aside for morning. Then she pulled out her father's letter one more time, reading the familiar words by lamplight. William will take care of you. He's blood. He won't turn you away. Her father had been wrong in the end. William couldn't take care of her, couldn't help her, because he was gone. But in a strange way, he was still giving her something. A chance, however slim. A piece of land that was hers by blood, if not yet by law. A possibility. I'll make you both proud, Eleanor whispered to the empty room. I don't know how, but I will. Outside, Silver Ridge settled into its nightly rhythms. The saloon piano played, miners laughed and argued. Somewhere a dog barked at the moon. Eleanor blew out the lamp and lay down, her body aching from the day's ride, her mind still spinning with everything she'd learned and everything still to come. Tomorrow she would deliver her letter to the bank. Tomorrow she would face Cornelius Webb and stake her claim. Tomorrow the real fight would begin. But tonight, for the first time since stepping off that stagecoach, Eleanor Grant fell asleep not in despair, but in something that felt dangerously close to hope. The morning sun hadn't yet cleared the mountains when Eleanor walked through the doors of Silver Ridge Bank and Trust. She'd dressed in her best remaining outfit, a navy dress with modest trim, her hair pinned severely back, every inch the proper Philadelphia lady she'd once been. If she was going to face Cornelius Webb, she would do it looking like someone who couldn't be dismissed easily. The bank interior smelled of wood polish and paper, all dark paneling and brass fixtures meant to convey stability and permanence. A young clerk looked up from his desk, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of a woman entering alone at such an early hour. May I help you, miss? I'm here to see Mr. Webb. My name is Eleanor Grant. The clerk's expression shifted, recognition flickering across his face. Grant? Are you related to William Grant was my uncle. I need to speak with Mr. Webb about his estate. I see. The clerk stood, suddenly nervous. If you'll wait here, I'll see if Mr. Webb is available. He disappeared through a door marked private, and Eleanor stood in the hushed bank lobby, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd rehearsed what she would say a dozen times last night, but now the words felt slippery, unreliable. What was she doing, thinking she could negotiate with a man like Webb? She was a 23-year-old woman with no money, no connections, nothing but a blood tie to a dead drunk. But she'd come too far to turn back now. Miss Grant? The clerk had returned. Mr. Webb will see you now. Cornelius Webb's office was larger than the rest of the bank combined, or so it seemed. Heavy drapes framed windows overlooking Main Street. A massive desk dominated the room, its surface neat except for a few carefully arranged papers. And behind the desk sat Webb himself, a man in his 50s with silver hair, expensive clothes, and eyes that calculated the value of everything they saw. Miss Grant? He didn't stand, didn't offer his hand. This is unexpected. Please, sit. Eleanor took the chair across from him, keeping her spine straight, her hands folded calmly in her lap, even though they wanted to tremble. "Thank you for seeing me, Mr. Webb. I confess I'm curious." Webb leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "The letter you sent yesterday was quite interesting. You claim to be William Grant's niece?" "I am his niece, his brother's daughter. I have documentation if you require it." "Documentation?" Webb's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Yes, I suppose we should establish that first. After all, anyone could claim a relationship to a dead man." Eleanor reached into her reticule and pulled out the papers she'd prepared. Her father's death certificate showing him as William Grant's brother. Her own birth certificate. The letters her uncle had sent over the years. She laid them on the desk one by one, and Webb examined each with painstaking care. Finally, he nodded. "Very well. It appears you are who you claim to be." He set the papers aside. "However, Miss Grant, I'm not sure what you hope to accomplish here. Your uncle died owing this bank a considerable sum, $2,300 to be precise. The property barely covers that debt. There's nothing left to inherit." "The property is my inheritance regardless of the debt," Eleanor said, keeping her voice steady. "As his sole living heir, I have a legal claim. I'm prepared to negotiate terms for satisfying the debt, but I won't simply hand over my family's land without a fight." Webb's eyebrows rose slightly, the first sign of genuine surprise. "Negotiate? Miss Grant, with what exactly do you propose to negotiate? Forgive my bluntness, but you appear to have no resources whatsoever." "I have time and determination. I'm prepared to work the land, to bring it back to profitability, to pay off the debt gradually, if you'll extend the terms." "You." But Webb's tone made it clear what he thought of that idea. "You're going to run a cattle ranch? A young woman from, where was it, Philadelphia? With no experience, no capital, no prospects?" Heat rose in Eleanor's cheeks, but she held his gaze. "I have help. Jonas Hale has agreed to stay on and assist with the operation. And I'm a fast learner, Mr. Webb. I may not know ranching now, but I will." "Jonas Hale." Webb's expression darkened. "Yes, I've heard he's been squatting on the property. That will need to stop immediately." "He's not squatting. He's working as my foreman." "Your foreman." Webb stood abruptly, moving to the window. For a long moment he was silent, looking out at the street below. When he spoke again, his voice was different, harder, more menacing. "Miss Grant, let me explain something to you. This is not Philadelphia. This is not some genteel society where a lady's claims carry weight simply because she's a lady. This is business, and in business, sentiment means nothing." He turned back to her, and Eleanor saw something in his face that made her stomach clench. "Your uncle was a drunk who let a perfectly good property go to ruin. He borrowed money he couldn't repay, made promises he couldn't keep. When he died, his debts became the bank's problem. Now you show up with nothing but a blood tie and expect me to extend credit? To risk this institution's capital on the whim of a girl playing at ranching?" "I'm not playing at anything," Eleanor said, standing to face him. "That land is my birthright. My uncle built something there, and I intend to preserve it." "Your birthright." Webb's laugh was cold. "Your uncle built nothing but a monument to failure. And now you want to follow in his footsteps?" He moved back to his desk, pulling out a document. "I'll tell you what I'm prepared to offer, Miss Grant, and I suggest you take it. The bank will purchase the property for $1,000, enough to cover half the debt and leave you with a small sum to start fresh elsewhere. You sign over any claims, and we'll call it settled." "That's robbery," Eleanor breathed. "The land alone is worth 3 times that." "The land is worth what someone is willing to pay for it, and right now I'm the only buyer." Webb pushed the document across the desk. "Take the offer, Miss Grant. Go back east where you belong. This territory eats people like you alive." Eleanor looked at the paper, at the neat handwriting that would sign away everything. Her hands shook with anger now, not fear. "No." "I beg your pardon?" "I said no. I'm not selling. I'm not giving up. You want that land, Mr. Webb? You'll have to take it from me legally, and I promise you I'll fight every step of the way." She gathered her papers, shoving them back into her reticule. "I may be just a girl from Philadelphia with no experience, But I'm also William Grant's heir, and I have rights under territorial law, rights I intend to exercise. Webb's face had gone hard as stone. You're making a mistake. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make. Eleanor moved toward the door, then paused. I'll be in touch, Mr. Webb, when I'm ready to discuss reasonable terms for repayment. Good day. She walked out of his office with her head high, through the bank lobby, out onto the street where the morning sun hit her like a wall of heat. Only then did she allow herself to shake, to feel the full weight of what she'd just done. She'd declared war on the most powerful man in Silver Ridge, a man who could crush her without breaking a sweat. But she'd also stood her ground. For the first time in her life, she'd looked power in the face and refused to blink. That went well, I take it. Eleanor spun to find Jonas leaning against the wall of the general store, hat pulled low against the sun. Relief flooded through her. How did you? Saw you go in. Figured I'd wait. He straightened, studying her face. You look like you just kicked a hornet's nest. I refused his offer. He wanted to buy the property for $1,000. Jonas let out a low whistle. That's less than half what the land's worth. He's testing you, seeing if you'll fold easy. Well, I didn't fold. Eleanor's voice shook slightly. I may have just made the stupidest decision of my life, but I didn't fold. Something like approval flickered in Jonas's eyes. Good. Webb's used to people rolling over for him. About time someone pushed back. He glanced up at the sun. You done with your shift at Mays? Yes. I worked the breakfast rush. Then let's get out to the ranch. We've got work to do, and if you've just declared war on Webb, we better make damn sure we have something worth fighting for. They rode out together, Eleanor on Daisy and Jonas on a rangy gelding he called Smoke. The morning had grown hot, and dust rose in small clouds from the horses' hooves. Neither of them spoke much. Eleanor was still processing the confrontation with Webb, and Jonas seemed content with silence. But as they crested the rise that overlooked the ranch, Jonas pulled up his horse. Before we get down there, you need to understand something. He looked at her directly, his expression serious. Webb's not going to take this lying down. He'll push back, and when he does, it won't be gentle. You sure you're ready for that? Eleanor thought about her father's sick room, about selling her mother's wedding ring to buy medicine that didn't work, about the look on the creditor's face when he'd told her she had a week to vacate the only home she'd ever known. She'd survived all of that. She could survive Webb. I'm sure, she said. Jonas nodded once, then urged his horse forward. Then let's get to work. The next weeks blurred into a relentless cycle of labor that left Eleanor so exhausted she sometimes fell asleep still wearing her boots. Jonas woke her each morning before dawn, and together they tackled the endless list of repairs the ranch demanded. Eleanor learned to hammer nails straight, to dig post holes in rocky soil, to curse when the work went wrong and celebrate the small victories when it went right. Her hands, already toughened from her work at Mays, developed new calluses. Her arms grew stronger from hauling fence wire and lifting water buckets. The soft Philadelphia lady disappeared layer by layer, replaced by someone harder, more capable, forged by necessity and determination. Jonas proved to be a patient teacher, though he had no tolerance for self-pity or excuses. When Eleanor struggled to lift a heavy beam, he showed her how to use leverage instead of strength. When she nearly gave up on fixing the barn door, he simply said, Your uncle built this whole barn by himself. You can fix one door. And she did. You're learning, Jonas said one afternoon as they surveyed a newly repaired section of fence. Faster than I expected, honestly. Eleanor wiped sweat from her forehead, leaving a streak of dirt in its wake. I told you I was a fast learner. You did. He handed her a canteen and she drank gratefully. But there's a difference between learning and doing, and you're doing it. That counts for something. The compliment warmed her more than it probably should have. Jonas was sparing with praise, which made it more meaningful when it came. They fell into a partnership that worked despite, or maybe because of, how different they were. Jonas knew the land, knew cattle, and horses and weather patterns. Eleanor brought organization and planning, keeping careful records of their progress and expenses. She had a head for numbers that surprised him. You worked as a clerk or something back east? He asked one evening as she tallied their meager supplies. I helped my father manage his accounts. Banking runs in the family, apparently. She smiled wryly. though I seem to have inherited none of the capital that usually goes with it. Capital's overrated. Skills last longer. Jonas poured coffee for both of them, a nightly ritual they'd developed. Your father, he was Bill's brother? Yes, the older brother. The responsible one who stayed east and built a proper life. Eleanor's voice softened. They were close once, before Uncle William left. My father used to tell me stories about their childhood, about how William was always the adventurous one, always dreaming about the frontier. Sounds like Bill. He loved this land even when it broke his heart. Jonas stared into his coffee. He ever tell you about his wife, Sarah? No? We'd lost touch by then. She was something special. Came out here with him, worked as hard as any man. Then fever took her that first winter, and Bill, well, he never recovered. Took to drinking to quiet the grief, and the drinking took everything else. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Is that why you stayed? Even after he couldn't pay you properly? Jonas looked up, surprised by her perception. Part of it. Bill gave me work when I needed it most, no questions asked. But it was more than that. I understood what it was to lose everything, to try to drown the pain in a bottle. Figured the least I could do was keep him from losing the last thing he had. The ranch. The ranch. Jonas set down his cup. Now it's yours, for whatever that's worth. But Eleanor, it was the first time he'd used her given name, and something shifted in the air between them. You should know that Webb's been asking questions in town. About you, about me, about what we're doing out here. He's building a case. A case for what? For claiming you're not fit to manage the property, that you're just a girl playing at ranching while the land continues to deteriorate. Jonas's expression was grim. He's looking for ammunition to force a sale or seizure. Fear fluttered in Eleanor's chest, but she pushed it down. Then we'll have to prove him wrong. We'll work harder, show more progress. What's next on the list? The cattle. We need to round up what's left of Bill's herd, see what we're working with. But Eleanor, that's not a job for... Don't say it's not a job for a woman. I've been hearing that my whole life, and I'm tired of it. She stood, brushing dust from her skirt. When do we start? Jonas studied her for a long moment, then slowly smiled. Tomorrow, dawn, and you'll need to learn to rope. Learning to rope proved harder than mending fences or repairing doors. Eleanor spent hours swinging a lasso, missing posts, hitting dirt, tangling the rope around her own feet while Jonas watched with what might have been amusement. You're thinking too much, he said finally. Let your body learn it. Feel the weight of the rope, the rhythm. It's like a dance, sort of. I'm terrible at dancing too, Eleanor muttered, but she tried again. This time, the loop sailed out and settled around the fence post, and she let out a whoop of triumph. There you go. Jonas's grin was genuine now. Do that about 1,000 more times, and you'll be decent at it. They rode out the next morning into the foothills, searching for the cattle that had scattered across the range. The work was hard and hot, hours in the saddle tracking signs and following trails. But when they finally found a small group of cattle, scrawny, half-wild things bearing her uncle's brand, Eleanor felt a surge of something like victory. That's maybe 15 head, Jonas said, counting. There should be more. We'll have to search wider tomorrow. 15's a start. Eleanor watched the cattle graze, their rough coats catching the afternoon light. These animals represented value, potential income, a way forward. How much would they bring at market? In their current condition? Not much. We'd need to fatten them up, maybe wait until spring to sell. Jonas pulled out a worn notebook and made notes. But it's something, proof that this ranch isn't dead yet. Over the following days, they found more cattle, 30 head in total, which Jonas said was about a third of what the ranch had once carried. But it was enough to work with, enough to build on. Eleanor learned to move cattle, to anticipate which way they'd break, to stay calm when a steer charged or when Daisy spooked at a snake. She learned the satisfaction of a hard day's work, of muscles aching with honest labor, of falling into bed too tired to worry about anything but sleep. And slowly, almost without noticing, she began to feel like this place was becoming hers. Not on paper, not yet, but in her bones, in the way she knew which fence posts needed reinforcing, in the sound of her boots on the porch boards, in the view of the mountains from the kitchen window. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the sun set behind the peaks, Jonas said quietly, "You've surprised me, Eleanor Grant." She looked at him, this quiet man who'd become her partner in this impossible venture. "How so?" "I didn't think you'd last a week. Thought you'd realize how hard it was and run back to whatever life you left behind." He shook his head. "But you didn't. You dug in and held on, even when it hurt. That takes something special." "Desperation mostly," Eleanor said, but she was smiling. "No, it's more than that." Jonas's gaze was steady. "You've got your uncle's stubbornness, but you've got something he didn't. You've got hope, real hope, not the kind you find at the bottom of a bottle. And that might just be enough to save this place." Eleanor felt warmth spread through her chest, and she realized with a start that she was happy. Tired, covered in dust, facing impossible odds, but happy in a way she hadn't been since before her mother died. "Thank you," she said softly. "For staying, for helping, for believing this might work." "Don't thank me yet. We've still got a mountain to climb." But Jonas's expression was gentle. "Though I'll admit, I'm starting to think we might just make it to the top." The peaceful moment shattered 3 days later when Eleanor returned from her morning shift at Maze to find Jonas standing in the yard, his face dark with anger, holding a piece of paper. "What's wrong?" He handed her the paper without speaking. It was an official notice from the territorial assessor's office, informing her that the property would be inspected in 2 weeks to determine its current value and condition for tax assessment purposes. Tax assessment? Eleanor read it again, confused. But the property taxes were paid through last year. Uncle William might have owed the bank, but he kept current on his taxes. "Read the signature," Jonas said grimly. Eleanor looked at the bottom of the page and felt her stomach drop. The inspection was to be conducted by Cornelius Webb, acting as deputy assessor. "He can't do this. It's a conflict of interest. He's on the county board. He can do whatever he wants." Jonas took the paper back, crumpling it in his fist. "This is retaliation, Eleanor. You refused his offer, so now he's going to use his position to devalue the property, claim it's not being properly maintained, maybe even condemn it. Can he do that? Legally? Out here? Probably. The law's flexible when you're the one interpreting it." Jonas's jaw was tight. "We have 2 weeks to make this place look so good. He can't find anything to complain about. 2 weeks to do work that should take 2 months. Eleanor looked around the ranch, at the barn that still needed a new roof, at the corral that was only half repaired, at the 100 other things that needed fixing. 2 weeks. It was impossible. But then again, everything about this venture had been impossible from the start. "Then we'd better get started," she said. They worked like demons possessed. Jonas brought in help, a couple of ranch hands who'd known her uncle and were willing to work for promises of future payment. May contributed her Sunday afternoons, bringing food and pitching in where she could. Even Boone from the livery showed up one day with lumber and said gruffly, "Heard you might need this." The community support surprised Eleanor. She'd felt so alone when she first arrived, but now she realized that Silver Ridge had been watching, waiting to see if she was serious. And seeing her determination, seeing her work herself to exhaustion day after day, some of them had decided to help. "Small towns remember kindness," May explained as they painted the barn one afternoon. "Your uncle helped a lot of folks when they were down. Gave work when work was scarce, let debt slide when times were hard. These people haven't forgotten." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. Her uncle hadn't been perfect. The drinking, the debts, the slow surrender to grief. But he'd been good to his neighbors, and now his neighbors were being good to his niece. "I wish I'd known him," she said softly. "Really known him, not just through childhood letters." "He'd have liked you," May said with certainty. "Would have been proud of what you're doing here." As the inspection date approached, Eleanor barely slept. Every evening after working at the ranch all day, she sat up late by lamplight, preparing documentation, records of repairs made, lists of livestock and equipment, projections for future productivity. If Webb wanted to paint her as an incompetent girl playing at ranching, she'd show him exactly how competent she was. Jonas found her one night past midnight, still writing. "You need to rest," he said, concern in his voice. "I will. After the inspection." She didn't look up from her ledger. "These numbers have to be perfect, Jonas. He'll look for any mistake, any excuse." Eleanor. Jonas's hand covered hers, stilling her pen. The numbers are perfect. You've been over them a dozen times. If you don't sleep, you'll be too exhausted to defend them when he shows up. She looked up at him, really looked, and saw genuine worry in his eyes. When had he started to care so much? When had she started to depend on seeing that care reflected back at her? I'm scared, she admitted. What if we're not ready? What if he finds something we missed? Then we deal with it, together. Jonas squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. You're not alone in this, Eleanor. Whatever happens, we face it as partners. Partners. The word had come to mean so much more than it had that first day when they'd shaken hands in her uncle's dusty kitchen. Partners meant late-night conversations on the porch, meant the comfortable silence of working side by side, meant the way her heart lifted when she saw him riding in from checking the herd. Partners meant she wasn't alone anymore, and that realization was both thrilling and terrifying. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. Jonas smiled, and in the lamplight, Eleanor thought she saw something in his expression that matched what she was feeling, something neither of them was quite ready to name. Get some sleep, he said softly. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. But sleep wouldn't come. Even after she'd blown out the lamp and lay down on the narrow bed she'd claimed in what had once been her uncle's room. Her mind kept spinning, rehearsing arguments, imagining disasters. What if Webb found a way to take the ranch despite everything they'd done? What if all this work, all this hope, amounted to nothing? Outside, an owl called in the darkness, and the wind whispered through the cottonwoods. The sounds of the ranch at night, sounds that had become familiar, comforting. This place was home now, Eleanor realized. Not the house she'd grown up in, not the life she'd left behind, but this rough patch of Colorado territory where she'd learned what she was truly made of, and she would fight with everything she had to keep it. The morning of the inspection dawned clear and cold. Eleanor dressed in her best remaining dress, the navy one she'd worn to the bank, now carefully mended and pressed. She wanted to look professional, capable, like a woman who knew what she was doing even if her insides were churning with nerves. Jonas had already checked every inch of the property at first light, making sure nothing was out of place. The barn was tidy, the fences repaired, the corral gates hanging straight. The few cattle they'd gathered were visible in the near pasture, healthy enough to prove the ranch was operational. Everything they could control, they had controlled. Now all they could do was wait. Webb arrived precisely at 9 o'clock, climbing down from an expensive buggy driven by a clerk from the bank. He wore a fine suit despite the dust, and he carried a leather portfolio that somehow made Eleanor's carefully prepared documents seem amateurish by comparison. Miss Grant? He didn't tip his hat. I trust you received notice of this inspection? I did, Mr. Webb. We're ready. Eleanor kept her voice steady, professional. Would you like to begin with the main house or the outbuildings? I'll determine the order of inspection, thank you. Webb's gaze swept over the property, and Eleanor couldn't read his expression. Let's start with the land itself. I'll need to assess the grazing capacity and current usage. They walked the property for hours, Webb making notes, asking pointed questions, examining everything with painstaking detail. Eleanor answered each question as thoroughly as she could, pulling out her ledgers when needed, deferring to Jonas on technical matters about cattle and range management. Through it all, Webb's expression remained impassive. He praised nothing, criticized nothing, just observed and wrote in his neat, precise hand. Finally, as the sun reached its zenith, they returned to the house. Webb sat at the kitchen table and spread out his papers, and Eleanor felt like she was waiting for a judge to pronounce sentence. I've completed my assessment, Webb said without preamble. The property is being maintained at a basic level. Repairs have been made to essential structures. Livestock numbers are below historic averages, but not critically low. Eleanor's heart lifted slightly. That wasn't condemnation. That was acknowledgement of their work. But Webb wasn't finished. However, he continued, and Eleanor's hope crashed. I have serious concerns about the long-term viability of this operation. The improvements made are minimal, barely enough to keep the property from complete deterioration. The livestock operation is clearly not profitable at current scale. And most importantly, the management lacks the expertise and capital necessary for true success. That's not fair, Eleanor said, her voice shaking with anger. We've done everything possible with the resources available. The ranch is operational. The debts are being addressed. The debts. Webb looked up, his eyes cold. Yes, let's discuss those. Your uncle owed this bank $2,300. Interest continues to accrue. You've made no payments, proposed no concrete repayment plan. Instead, you've been playing at ranching while the debt grows larger. I've been working to restore the property's value, Eleanor shot back. A property worth far more than the debt if properly developed. I've been documenting everything, building a case for extended terms. Extended terms require collateral, Miss Grant. What exactly are you offering beyond land already pledged against the original loan? Webb closed his portfolio with a decisive snap. I'm afraid my assessment will reflect my concerns about mismanagement and lack of viability. The county board will receive my recommendation that this property be sold to satisfy outstanding debts. You can't do that. Eleanor stood, her hands balled into fists. You're using your position to steal my family's land because I refused your insulting offer. I'm performing my duty as deputy assessor. Webb stood as well, towering over her. If you wish to dispute my findings, you're welcome to appear before the county board at their next session in 3 months. 3 months. By then the bank could foreclose, sell the property, make the whole question moot. And Webb knew it. This is corrupt, Eleanor said, her voice shaking. Everyone in Silver Ridge will know what you're doing. Everyone in Silver Ridge knows that your uncle was a drunk who couldn't manage a successful operation. They'll see you as a misguided girl trying to hold on to something beyond her capabilities. Webb moved toward the door. My advice stands, Miss Grant. Take what you can get now before you lose everything. I'm offering you that mercy one final time. Get out, Eleanor said quietly. I beg your pardon? Get out of my house, off my land, now. Eleanor's voice was steel. You've completed your inspection. You're no longer welcome here. Webb's expression hardened. You'll regret this stubbornness, Miss Grant. I promise you that. Maybe, but at least I'll regret it on my own terms. Eleanor held his gaze until he looked away first, then watched as he stalked out to his buggy. Only after the dust from his departure had settled did Eleanor allow herself to collapse into a chair, her whole body shaking. Jonas, who'd been standing silently by the door throughout the confrontation, moved to her side. He's going to take it, Eleanor whispered. All this work, everything we've done, and he's going to take it anyway. Not without a fight, Jonas's voice was hard. We've got 3 months before the county board meets. That's 3 months to show real progress, to build support in town, to make it politically difficult for Webb to push this through. How, Jonas? We barely have money for supplies. How are we supposed to make 3 months of progress look like a success story? The cattle. We push them hard, fatten them up, sell them early at market. Won't get the best price, but it'll show cash flow, show we can generate income. Jonas was already thinking, planning, and we need allies on that county board. There's got to be someone who'll stand against Webb. Who? Everyone seems afraid of him. Not everyone. Jonas pulled out a chair and sat across from her. Tom Morrison, the rancher north of here. He's on the board, and he hated how Webb handled his brother's foreclosure 2 years back. If we can get him to see this as the same kind of overreach. Eleanor listened as Jonas outlined a strategy, his words washing over her like water over stone. She wanted to believe him, wanted to think they could somehow win this fight, but exhaustion was pulling at her, 3 weeks of relentless work catching up all at once. Eleanor. Jonas reached across the table, taking her hand. Look at me. She did, and saw determination burning in his eyes. We're not done. Not by a long shot. You hear me? Eleanor nodded, drawing strength from his conviction. We're not done. That's right. Now come on. We've got cattle to move and a miracle to make happen. As they stood and headed out to begin the next impossible task, Eleanor felt something inside her shift and harden. Webb thought he could break her with assessments and threats. He thought she'd fold under pressure. He was about to learn just how stubborn a Philadelphia banker's daughter could be when she had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The real battle was just beginning, and Eleanor Grant wasn't backing down. The days that followed Webb's inspection moved with brutal speed, each sunrise marking another day closer to the county board meeting that would decide the ranch's fate. Eleanor and Jonas drove themselves harder than ever, rising before dawn and working until they could barely see by lamplight. The cattle became their focus, their one shot at proving the ranch could generate real income. "We need them looking fat and healthy by mid-November," Jonas explained as they surveyed the small herd one morning. "That's when the autumn market runs in Denver. If we can show actual sales receipts, actual profit, it undercuts Webb's argument that this operation isn't viable." "How much weight do they need to gain?" Eleanor asked, studying the cattle with eyes that had learned to assess their condition over the past weeks. "Another 150 pounds each, ideally. We'll need to move them to better grazing, supplement with hay if we can afford it." Jonas pulled off his hat, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cool morning air. "It's going to be close, Eleanor. Real close." Close became the theme of their existence. Close on time, close on money, close to the edge of collapse every single day. Eleanor worked her morning shifts at Mays, then rode straight out to the ranch, often not returning to town until after dark. Her body moved on autopilot, muscles remembering tasks her exhausted mind could barely process. But slowly, impossibly, progress emerged. The cattle began to fill out as they moved them to a better pasture Jonas knew about on the northern edge of the property. Eleanor learned to read the sky for weather, to move the herd before storms hit, to doctor the minor injuries and illnesses that plagued livestock. Every skill Jonas taught her, she absorbed with desperate intensity, knowing that competence was their only defense against Webb's accusations. May noticed the toll the work was taking. "You're running yourself into the ground, honey," she said one morning when Eleanor nearly fell asleep standing up over a pot of coffee. "You keep this pace. You'll be no good to anyone." "I don't have a choice," Eleanor said, forcing her eyes to stay open. 3 months, May. That's all the time we have to turn this around." "And what good will 3 months do if you collapse before then?" May pressed a cup of strong coffee into her hands. "Listen to me. You've got folks willing to help. Let them. We can't afford to pay." "Not everything's about money." May's voice was sharp. "Tom Morrison, he's got hands who know cattle. He might lend you some expertise. And there's others in town who'd pitch in for a day's work, especially if they knew it was to stand up to Webb." Eleanor looked at May, really looked at her, and saw the concern etched in the older woman's weathered face. "Why are you all helping me? You barely know me." "Because this ain't just about you anymore, girl. It's about whether Webb can use his position to steal whatever he wants from whoever he wants." May's eyes flashed. "Your uncle might have had his problems, but that land was his. And now it's yours by right. Folks around here have had enough of Webb's dealings. You're giving them a chance to push back." The words stayed with Eleanor as she rode out to the ranch that afternoon. She'd been so focused on her own fight, her own survival, that she hadn't seen the bigger picture. This battle wasn't just about one ranch or one woman's inheritance. It was about power and principle, about whether a man like Webb could simply take what he wanted because he controlled the money and the political machinery. Jonas was waiting when she arrived, and his expression told her something had happened. "What is it?" "Tom Morrison came by while you were in town." Jonas's voice was carefully neutral. "Heard about Webb's inspection, about what he's trying to do. He's not happy about it." Eleanor's heart leaped. "Will he help? Is he willing to stand against Webb at the board meeting?" "Maybe, but he wants to meet with you first, assess the situation himself. He's not going to stick his neck out unless he believes the operation is sound." Jonas met her eyes. "He's coming by tomorrow afternoon." Tomorrow? Eleanor felt panic flutter in her chest. One more test, one more person to convince. What do we need to do? How do we prepare? We show him the truth, the good and the bad, all of it. Jonas's expression was serious. Morrison's a straight shooter. He'll see through any attempt to prettify things. We tell him what we've done, what we're planning, and let him make his own judgment. That night, Eleanor barely slept again, running through scenarios and arguments in her mind. Tom Morrison was one of the largest ranchers in the territory, a man whose opinion carried weight. If he believed in their operation, it could tip the scales. If he didn't, they were finished. She was up before dawn, checking and rechecking the property, making sure everything was as good as it could be. Jonas found her in the barn, anxiously straightening already straight tools. "Eleanor, stop." His hand on her shoulder was gentle but firm. "It's good enough. Better than good. You've turned this place around in ways I wouldn't have believed possible 2 months ago. But what if Morrison doesn't see it that way? What if he looks at our small herd and our patched-together repairs and sees exactly what Webb sees? A failing operation run by an inexperienced woman. Then he's a fool, and his opinion doesn't matter. Jonas turned her to face him. But Morrison's not a fool. He's a rancher, and ranchers respect hard work and honest effort. That's what we've got here. That's what he'll see. Eleanor wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed at her. Everything rode on this meeting, on convincing one man that they deserved a chance to succeed. Tom Morrison arrived precisely at 2 o'clock, riding a fine bay horse that spoke of quality breeding and careful maintenance. He was a man in his late 50s, Eleanor guessed, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent decades working under the sun. His eyes were sharp and assessing as he dismounted. "Miss Grant, Jonas." He shook hands with both of them, his grip firm. "Appreciate you agreeing to meet." "Thank you for coming, Mr. Morrison," Eleanor said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Would you like to see the property?" "I would, and call me Tom." Mr. Morrison makes me feel older than I already am. They walked the ranch, Morrison asking pointed questions about water rights, grazing capacity, the condition of the soil. Unlike Webb, whose questions had felt like traps, Morrison seemed genuinely interested in understanding the operation. Eleanor answered as best she could, deferring to Jonas on technical matters, but making clear that she understood the business side of ranching. When they reached the pasture where the cattle grazed, Morrison spent a long time studying the herd in silence. Eleanor held her breath, trying to see what he saw, wondering if their 30 head looked pathetic compared to his operation. Finally, Morrison spoke. "Jonas tells me you've been moving them around, managing the grazing carefully." "Yes, sir. We're trying to fatten them up for the autumn market, show that we can generate income." Eleanor gestured to the cattle. "I know it's not much compared to what this ranch used to carry, but it's a start." "A start." Morrison nodded slowly. "That's all any of us had once. I came out here with 12 head 30 years ago. Now I run 2,000. He looked at her directly. "The question isn't how many cattle you have now, Miss Grant. It's whether you've got the grit to build from here." "I do," Eleanor said without hesitation. "I know I'm new to this. Know I've got more to learn than I could list. But I'm not afraid of hard work. And I'm not giving up this land without exhausting every possible option." Morrison's lips quirked in what might have been approval. "Webb came to see me last week, told me about his assessment, about his concerns regarding your management capabilities." Eleanor's stomach dropped. "I see. Said you were a city girl playing at ranching, that the property would be better served by a foreclosure and sale to someone with actual experience." Morrison's expression was unreadable. He suggested I should support his recommendation to the board. This was it then. Morrison had already been poisoned against her, had probably already decided before even coming here. Eleanor felt defeat wash over her, heavy and cold, but Morrison wasn't finished. "I told Webb he could go to hell." Eleanor's head snapped up. "What?" "I told him to go to hell," Morrison repeated, a grin breaking across his weathered face. "Webb's been using his position to acquire properties at below-market prices for 2 years now, squeezing desperate people until they've got no choice but to sell to him or his associates. I watched him do it to my brother, and I swore then I'd stop him if I ever got the chance." He looked at Eleanor with respect. "You're giving me that chance, Miss Grant." Relief flooded through Eleanor so powerfully she nearly staggered. "You'll support us at the board meeting?" "I will, but more than that, I'm going to help you make sure there's something worth supporting." Morrison turned to Jonas. "You'll need hay to keep those cattle gaining weight through autumn. I'll sell you 20 tons at cost, and I've got a hand who's good with livestock. He can come over a few days a week, teach Miss Grant here some of the finer points of cattle management." "Tom, we can't afford—" Jonas started, but Morrison waved him off. "You'll pay me back when you sell those cattle, interest-free, and if the sale doesn't cover it, we'll work something out." Morrison's expression was firm. "This isn't charity. It's an investment in seeing Webb get what he deserves." Eleanor felt tears threatening and blinked them back hard. "Thank you. I don't know how to thank you properly, but thank me by succeeding. Thank me by standing up at that board meeting and showing everyone what real determination looks like." Morrison extended his hand again. You've got allies, Miss Grant. More than you know. Webb made a mistake when he decided to make an example of you. He's given folks a reason to rally. After Morrison left, Eleanor and Jonas stood in the yard watching the dust settle behind his horse. We have a chance, Eleanor whispered. An actual chance. We do. Jonas was smiling, really smiling, in a way she'd rarely seen. Tom Morrison's word carries weight on that board. If he's willing to speak for us, others might follow. Then we'd better make sure we're worthy of his faith. Eleanor squared her shoulders, feeling energy return despite her exhaustion. What's next? What came next was a whirlwind of activity that made their previous efforts seem leisurely by comparison. Morrison's hay arrived 2 days later, and with it came his hand, a grizzled cowboy named Dutch, who'd forgotten more about cattle than Eleanor would ever know. Under his tutelage, she learned to identify signs of illness before they became serious, to judge weight gain by eye and touch, to understand the subtle behaviors that meant a steer was thriving or struggling. You got an instinct for this, Dutch told her one afternoon as they worked together doctoring a calf with a minor infection. Wouldn't have thought it when I first saw you, all city-polished and nervous. But you listen, you watch, and you don't give up. That's what makes a rancher. The words warmed Eleanor more than she wanted to admit. She was becoming something she'd never imagined being, competent with rope and cattle, confident on horseback, capable of reading weather and land and animal health. The transformation wasn't complete, but it was real, and she could feel it in her muscles, in her calloused hands, in the way she no longer flinched when a steer charged. May noticed, too. Look at you, she said one morning when Eleanor came in for her shift. When you first walked into my cafe, you looked like a strong wind would blow you over. Now you look like you could punch the wind back. Eleanor laughed, surprised to find she still could. The weight of the impending board meeting hung over everything, but in the day-to-day work, in the small victories and steady progress, she found moments of genuine joy. And increasingly, she found those moments included Jonas. They'd fallen into a partnership so seamless it felt like they'd been working together for years rather than months. He anticipated what she needed before she asked. She understood his silences, could read his moods in the set of his shoulders, or the way he pushed his hat back when thinking hard about a problem. They'd become a team in the truest sense, and somewhere along the way, the boundary between partnership and something deeper had begun to blur. It was in the way Jonas's hand lingered on hers when he passed her tools, in the way Eleanor found herself watching him work, admiring the easy competence of his movements, in the conversations that stretched late into the evening, ranging from ranch business to stories of their pasts, to dreams for futures neither quite dared name aloud. One night, sitting on the porch after a particularly long day, Jonas broke a comfortable silence with an unexpected question. What'll you do? If we lose at the board meeting? Eleanor was quiet for a moment, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. I don't know. I haven't let myself think that far ahead. You should. Not because I think we'll lose, but because you need a plan. For after. Jonas's voice was careful. This place, this fight, it can't be your whole life, Eleanor. What do you want? Really want beyond just keeping this ranch? The question unsettled her because she didn't have an answer. For months, survival had been her only goal. Keep the ranch, fight Webb, prove herself capable. But beyond that, she'd been too afraid to imagine beyond the immediate crisis. I want, she started, then stopped. What did she want? I want to build something lasting. Not just survive, but thrive. I want to prove that Uncle William's dream wasn't wasted, that this land can support a good life. She paused, then added quietly, I want to belong somewhere. Really belong, not just be tolerated or pitied. You belong here, Jonas said, and something in his tone made Eleanor's heart skip. You've earned that, Eleanor. No matter what happens with Webb or the board, you've proven you belong in this territory. Have I? She turned to look at him, finding his eyes already on her. Sometimes I still feel like that lost girl who stepped off the stagecoach, pretending to know what she's doing. We're all pretending, at least a little. Jonas's smile was sad. I came out here running from things I'd rather forget. Your uncle gave me a place to land, to start over. This ranch, He gestured at the darkened landscape. It's been my redemption. Watching you fight for it, seeing you transform from that lost girl into someone who can work cattle and face down Webb without flinching, it's been... He trailed off, seeming to struggle for words. It's been what? Eleanor prompted, barely breathing. Jonas looked at her for a long moment, and in his eyes, she saw everything he wasn't saying. The respect that had deepened into admiration, the partnership that had grown into something neither of them had been looking for but both had found anyway. It's been an honor, he said finally, and though the words were simple, the weight behind them was anything but. Eleanor felt something in her chest crack open, some last defense she'd been maintaining against the feelings that had been growing despite her best efforts to ignore them. She cared for Jonas, had come to depend not just on his help, but on his presence, on the way he made her feel capable and strong and seen in ways no one else ever had. Jonas, she began, but he shook his head gently. Don't. Not yet. His voice was rough. Let's get through the board meeting first. Let's know where we stand. Then, he let the sentence hang, full of possibility and promise. Eleanor nodded, understanding even as disappointment flickered through her. He was right. They couldn't afford distraction, couldn't let personal feelings complicate the fight they were in. But knowing there might be a then that he felt what she felt made the waiting bearable. They sat in silence after that, close but not touching, both looking out at the land they were fighting for. And Eleanor thought that this moment, this quiet understanding between them, was worth fighting for too. The weeks blurred together in a haze of work and worry. The cattle continued to fatten, visibly healthier than when they'd started. Eleanor practiced her presentation for the board meeting until she could recite the numbers in her sleep, costs, revenues, projections, all backed by careful documentation. Morrison checked in regularly, offering advice and encouragement, but Webb was working too. Eleanor heard rumors through May and other townspeople of Webb meeting privately with board members, of pressure being applied behind closed doors. 2 of the 5 board members were known to be in Webb's pocket, bought and paid for through various business dealings. Morrison was solid in their corner. That left 2 undecided votes that would determine everything. Samuel Foster and Margaret Chen, Jonas said, reviewing what they knew. Foster owns the feed store, been in Silver Ridge for 20 years. Chen runs the largest hotel in town, came out from San Francisco 5 years back. Both of them are independent-minded, but both have business relationships with the bank. So they're not likely to cross Webb, Eleanor said, feeling hope slip away. Not unless they have a good reason. Jonas looked thoughtful. We need to give them that reason. Show them this isn't just about one ranch, but about principle, about whether Webb can abuse his position without consequence. How do we do that? We make sure the whole town knows what's at stake. We make it public, make it impossible for Foster and Chen to side with Webb without looking like they're endorsing corruption. Jonas's expression was determined. The board meeting is public. We make sure it's packed, that there are witnesses to whatever happens. Eleanor felt a flutter of nerves. You mean turn it into a spectacle? I mean turn it into a moment of truth. Let the whole town see what Webb's doing, hear him explain why he thinks his assessment was fair, put him on the defensive instead of us. It was risky, Eleanor knew. If they failed publicly, the humiliation would be total. But Jonas was right. They needed more than just Morrison's support. They needed public pressure, community accountability. All right, she said, let's make it public. Over the next week, they quietly spread word through town about the board meeting and what was really at stake. May helped, mentioning it to customers at the cafe. Morrison talked to fellow ranchers. Even Boone at the livery pitched in, telling anyone who'd listen about the young woman fighting to keep her uncle's legacy. The response surprised Eleanor. People she'd never met stopped her in the street to offer encouragement. Miners she'd served at May's promised they'd attend the meeting. Even some of the more reserved townspeople expressed quiet support, tired of watching Webb accumulate property and power unchecked. You've become a symbol, May told her a few days before the meeting. Whether you wanted it or not, people see you as standing up to something bigger than just one foreclosure. I'm not trying to be a symbol, Eleanor protested. I'm just trying to keep my uncle's ranch. Sometimes that's how it starts. One person saying no when everyone else has been saying yes out of fear or exhaustion. May's eyes were knowing. You gave folks permission to care again, to believe they could push back. That's powerful, Eleanor. The night before the county board meeting, Eleanor couldn't sleep at all. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, mentally reviewing her presentation, imagining every possible question or objection. The numbers were solid, she knew that. The improvements to the property were documented, the progress undeniable. But would it be enough? Around midnight, unable to stand the confinement of her small room any longer, Eleanor dressed and walked out into the quiet town. The streets were empty, most of Silver Ridge asleep, but light showed in the window of the ranch house on the outskirts, and Eleanor found her feet carrying her there almost without conscious decision. Jonas was on the porch, as if he'd been expecting her. Couldn't sleep either? Too much riding on tomorrow. Eleanor climbed the steps and sat beside him on the bench her uncle had built years ago. I keep thinking about everything that could go wrong. Then think about everything that could go right. Jonas's voice was steady in the darkness. We've done the work, Eleanor. We've proven the ranch can be viable. Morrison's going to speak for us. The town's behind us. We've done everything possible. And if it's not enough? Jonas was quiet for a moment. Then he said, then we tried. Really tried, with everything we had. There's honor in that, even in defeat. I don't want honor in defeat, Eleanor said fiercely. I want to win. I want to keep this place, to build the life I've been working toward. I want... She stopped, unable to finish the sentence because it led to truths she wasn't quite ready to speak aloud. I know, Jonas said softly, and his hand found hers in the darkness. I want that too. They sat like that for a long time, hands clasped, drawing strength from each other. And when Eleanor finally stood to walk back to town, Jonas walked with her, neither of them speaking, but both understanding that tomorrow would change everything, one way or another. The county board meeting was held in the town hall, a building that normally hosted dances and social gatherings, but today felt like a courtroom. Eleanor arrived early with Jonas, her carefully prepared documents in hand, her best dress pressed and perfect, despite the trembling of her fingers as she'd fastened the buttons that morning. The hall was already filling with people. Morrison was there, along with several other ranchers Eleanor recognized but didn't know well. May had closed the cafe for the afternoon, bringing several of her regular customers with her. Even Boone had come, standing in the back with his arms crossed, his expression grim. And there, in the front row, sat Cornelius Webb, looking supremely confident, his expensive suit and polished boots a stark contrast to the rough clothes of most attendees. The 5 board members filed in and took their seats at a long table at the front of the room. Eleanor recognized Morrison, saw him give her a subtle nod. Beside him sat Foster and Chen, the 2 undecided votes. And at either end sat the 2 men everyone knew belonged to Webb, Harrison Polk, who managed several of Webb's properties, and James Cartwright, whose debts to the bank were substantial and well known. This meeting of the Silver Ridge County Board is called to order, Morrison announced, his voice carrying through the packed hall. We're here to review the assessment of the Grant property and to determine appropriate action regarding outstanding debts. He looked directly at Eleanor. Miss Grant, you've requested an opportunity to address the board? Eleanor stood, her knees threatening to buckle, her mouth dry as dust. Every eye in the room was on her, and for one terrifying moment, her mind went completely blank. Then she saw Jonas, sitting in the front row, his expression steady and confident. She saw May, giving her an encouraging smile. She saw the faces of people who'd come to support her, who believed she could do this. She took a breath and began to speak, her voice growing stronger with each word. Members of the board, my name is Eleanor Grant, and I'm here to fight for my family's land. My uncle, William Grant, built his ranch from nothing 20 years ago. He weathered droughts and hard winters. He helped his neighbors. He contributed to this community. Yes, he struggled in his final years. Yes, he died in debt. But that doesn't erase what he built or negate my right as his sole heir to continue his legacy. She pulled out her first document, numbers she'd verified and re-verified 100 times. In the 3 months since I arrived in Silver Ridge, I've made significant improvements to the property. Fences have been repaired, buildings restored, livestock gathered and properly managed. I've documented every expense, every hour of labor. The property value has increased by at least 30% through these efforts. Miss Grant, Polk interrupted, his tone dismissive. Improvement alone doesn't address the outstanding debt. Your uncle owed $2,300. How do you propose to satisfy that obligation? Eleanor had expected this question, had prepared for it. I'm proposing a structured repayment plan. This autumn, I'll be taking 30 head of cattle to market. Conservative estimates project revenues of approximately $900. That's nearly 40% of the principal, paid within 4 months of taking possession. I'm requesting the board extend the loan terms to allow for continued payments from future sales. Future sales? Webb's voice cut through the room like a knife. Based on what? Your extensive ranching experience? Your demonstrated business acumen? He stood, addressing the board rather than Eleanor. Gentlemen, Mrs. Chen, let's be honest about what we're seeing here. Miss Grant is a well-meaning young woman who's in over her head. She's made some cosmetic improvements with the help of a hired hand, but that doesn't constitute a viable operation. This board's responsibility is to protect the county's financial interests, not to enable romantic notions of frontier adventure. Anger flared hot in Eleanor's chest. Romantic notions? I've worked 18-hour days for 3 months straight. I've learned skills I never knew existed. I've turned a dying property into one that's operational and profitable. If that's romance, Mr. Webb, then I'll take it over your brand of cynical opportunism any day. A ripple of reaction moved through the crowd. Approval, surprise, says. Tension. Webb's expression darkened. My assessment was based on professional standards and territorial regulations. If Miss Grant wants to impugn my integrity, I don't need to impugn it, Eleanor interrupted, her fear burning away in the heat of righteous anger. Your actions speak for themselves. You've used your position as deputy assessor to acquire properties at below-market prices, to pressure desperate people into selling. You came to me with an offer of $1,000 for land worth 3 times that, and when I refused, you retaliated with a punitive assessment designed to force foreclosure. That's a serious accusation, Morrison said, his voice carefully neutral but his eyes gleaming. It's the truth, Eleanor said firmly, and I'm not the only person in this room who knows it. She looked out at the crowd, saw nods of agreement, saw people whose families had been similarly pressured. How many properties has Mr. Webb acquired through foreclosure in the past 2 years? How many of those foreclosures came after his assessments as deputy assessor? Webb's face had gone red. This is outrageous. I'm here in my capacity as a concerned citizen and creditor, nothing more. My assessment was fair and professional, and if Miss Grant is unable to satisfy legitimate debts, that's her failure, not mine. Then explain the timing, Eleanor pressed. Explain why you offered to purchase my property for less than half its value, and when I refused, suddenly found it necessary to conduct an assessment that just happened to support foreclosure. Explain why you've been meeting privately with board members, pressuring them to support your position. I've had conversations, certainly, Webb said coldly. But unlike Miss Grant, I don't mistake business discussions for conspiracy. Perhaps if she spent less time on paranoid accusations and more time learning proper ranch management, she wouldn't be in this position. Perhaps if you spent less time using your position for personal gain, this board wouldn't need to waste time on manufactured crises, Eleanor shot back. The room erupted. People were shouting, some in support of Eleanor, others defending Webb. Morrison pounded his gavel, calling for order. The other board members looked uncomfortable, clearly not having anticipated such a direct confrontation. When quiet finally returned, Morrison spoke. Miss Grant, you've made serious allegations. Do you have evidence to support them? Eleanor hesitated. She had suspicions, patterns she'd noticed, stories she'd heard. But hard evidence? That was harder to come by. Before she could answer, a voice from the back of the room spoke up. I've got evidence. Every head turned. Standing near the door was a man Eleanor vaguely recognized, young, nervous-looking, wearing a clerk's clothes. State your name, Morrison said. David Harper, sir. I worked as a clerk at Silver Ridge Bank and Trust. The young man's voice shook, but he pushed forward through the crowd. I was there when Mr. Webb drafted his assessment of the Grant property. I heard him tell Mr. Polk that the assessment didn't matter, that he'd make sure it justified foreclosure, regardless of actual conditions. The room went dead silent. Webb's face had gone from red to white. That's a lie. This man is a disgruntled employee spreading slander. I'm not disgruntled, Mr. Webb. I'm disgusted. Harper pulled papers from inside his coat. I've kept copies of correspondence, records of properties acquired after assessments, records of Mr. Webb's personal holdings. It's all here. A pattern of using official position for private gain. Morrison reached for the papers, his expression grave. The other board members crowded around to look, even Polk and Cartwright, unable to hide their shock at having Webb's schemes laid bare so publicly. Eleanor stood frozen, hardly daring to believe what was happening. Jonas had moved to her side, his presence steady and grounding as chaos erupted around them again. This is highly irregular, Cartwright was saying, but his voice lacked conviction. What's irregular is a deputy assessor using his position to force foreclosures on properties he wants to acquire, Morrison said coldly, still reading through Harper's documents. His face was set in hard lines. Mrs. Chen, Mr. Foster, I think you'll want to see these. The two undecided board members examined the papers, their expressions growing increasingly troubled. Eleanor watched their faces, trying to read the verdict forming there. Finally, Mrs. Chen looked up. She was a handsome woman in her 40s, known for her sharp business sense and no-nonsense demeanor. Mr. Webb, these documents appear to show a pattern of conflict of interest at minimum and possible criminal misconduct at worst. I move that this board immediately suspend your authority as deputy assessor pending a full investigation. Seconded, Foster said grimly. All in favor? Morrison called, and 3 hands went up, his own, Chen's, and Foster's. A clear majority. Polk and Cartwright sat silent, unable to vote against Webb, but unwilling to publicly support him now. Motion carries, Morrison declared. As for the matter of the Grant property, Miss Grant, your presentation has demonstrated competent management and a viable plan for debt repayment. I move that this board grant an extension of loan terms with quarterly reviews of progress. Miss Grant will make her first payment from the autumn cattle sale, with subsequent payments structured based on demonstrated cash flow. Seconded, Chen said immediately. The vote was the same, 3 in favor, 2 abstaining. Eleanor felt her knees buckle with relief, and Jonas's hand at her elbow was the only thing keeping her upright. Motion carries, Morrison said, his stern expression finally cracking into a smile. Miss Grant, the ranch is yours to keep and develop. Don't make us regret this decision. I won't, sir. I promise you won't. Eleanor's voice was thick with emotion. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers. People surged forward to congratulate her, to shake her hand, to tell her they'd known she could do it. May appeared and pulled Eleanor into a fierce hug. Morrison came down from the board table to shake her hand properly. Through it all, Eleanor kept looking for Jonas, needing to see him, to share this impossible victory with the person who'd made it possible. She finally spotted him near the door, and their eyes met across the crowded room. His smile was warm, proud, full of everything they hadn't yet said to each other. Webb had disappeared, slipping out in the chaos. Eleanor didn't care. Let him go. The ranch was hers, legally, officially hers. She'd stood up to power and won, not through money or connections, but through sheer stubborn determination and the support of people who believed in fighting for what was right. As the celebration continued around her, Eleanor felt something settle deep in her chest, a sense of belonging, of having earned her place in this rough territory. She'd come to Silver Ridge lost and desperate, with nothing but a dead man's legacy and dwindling hope. Now she had land, she had a future, and standing across that crowded room, watching her with warmth in his eyes, she had Jonas. Whatever came next, whatever challenges waited, she would face them here, in the territory that had tested her and found her worthy. The ranch was saved, but more than that, Eleanor Grant had saved herself, had discovered who she could be when pushed to the absolute limit and beyond. The girl from Philadelphia was gone, replaced by someone stronger, someone who could stand in the dust and the wind and call this harsh land home. The battle was won. Now the real work of building a life could begin. The celebration at May's Cafe lasted well into the night, but Eleanor slipped away before midnight, exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. She'd won, truly won, and the reality of it hadn't quite settled into her bones yet. The ranch was hers. The future she'd fought for was suddenly, impossibly real. Jonas found her standing on the porch of the ranch house, looking out at the moonlit landscape. She'd ridden out alone after leaving the party, needing space to process everything that had happened, but somehow she'd known he would follow. "You should be celebrating," he said quietly, coming to stand beside her. "The whole town wants to buy you drinks and hear the story of how you took down Cornelius Webb." "I didn't take him down. David Harper did that." Eleanor pulled her shawl tighter against the November chill. "I just refused to give up." "That's not nothing." Jonas leaned against the porch railing, his profile sharp in the moonlight. "Most people would have taken Webb's first offer and counted themselves lucky to escape with anything. You stood and fought when every rational calculation said you'd lose." "Maybe I'm not very rational." Eleanor tried to smile, but her voice wavered. "Jonas, I'm terrified." He turned to look at her, surprise flickering across his face. "Of what?" "You won. The ranch is saved." "That's what terrifies me." Eleanor's words came in a rush now, all the fear she'd been holding back flooding out. Fighting to keep it was one thing. Actually keeping it, actually making this work long term, that's something else entirely. What if I can't do it? What if the cattle sale doesn't bring enough money? What if next winter's harder than I can handle? What if I've just delayed the inevitable? "Eleanor," Jonas stepped closer, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Listen to me. You're not alone in this. You've got Morrison's support, the town's backing, and you've got me. As long as you want me here, I'm not going anywhere." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning that went beyond ranch partnership. Eleanor looked up at him, at the face that had become so familiar over these months of shared struggle, and felt her heart crack open completely. "I do want you here," she whispered, "not just as foreman or partner. Jonas, He kissed her before she could finish, and Eleanor felt everything else fall away. The fear, the exhaustion, the weight of responsibility. There was only this moment, only the warmth of his hands cradling her face, only the rightness of finally admitting what had been growing between them since that first day when they'd shaken hands over an impossible dream. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jonas rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that for weeks. Months, maybe. But I couldn't. Not while everything was uncertain. Not while you were fighting just to survive." "And now?" Eleanor's heart was racing. "Now we have time. Time to figure out what this is between us. Time to build something real." His smile was tender. "If you want that. If I'm not presuming too much." "You're not presuming anything I haven't been thinking myself." Eleanor touched his face, tracing the line of his jaw. "I came here with nothing, Jonas. No family, no home, no future. You helped me build all of that. You believed in me when I barely believed in myself." "You did the building. I just handed you tools." Jonas pulled her close, and Eleanor rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "But I'd like to keep doing that. If you'll let me. Keep building this life together. See where it leads." They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other in the quiet of the mountain night, and Eleanor felt something shift and settle inside her, some final piece of herself clicking into place. She'd found more than a ranch in Colorado territory. She'd found home, and she'd found love, and the combination felt like grace. The autumn cattle drive to Denver came sooner than Eleanor was ready for, but Jonas insisted the timing was right. "Market prices are good now," he explained as they prepared for the journey. "Wait until spring and we risk them dropping. Besides, we need that cash to make the first payment and stock up for winter." The drive itself was brutal work. Eleanor had thought she understood hard labor, but moving 30 head of cattle across rough territory while dealing with weather, predators, and the sheer unpredictability of livestock taught her new depths of exhaustion. Dutch rode with them, along with 2 hands Morrison had lent them, and Eleanor learned more about cattle management in those 5 days than she had in the previous 3 months. "You're a natural," Dutch told her on the 3rd night as they sat around the campfire. "Got good instincts for reading the herd, knowing when to push and when to hold back. That's something you can't really teach. Either you feel it or you don't." The praise warmed Eleanor, but she was too tired to do more than nod her thanks before falling asleep sitting up, her plate of beans still half full. Jonas covered her with a blanket and took her watch, letting her sleep through what should have been her turn. When she woke near dawn and realized what he'd done, she tried to scold him, but he just smiled and said, "Partners take care of each other. That goes both ways." Denver was overwhelming after months in Silver Ridge. So many people, so much noise, the sheer scale of civilization pressing in from all sides. But the stockyards were familiar territory to Jonas, and he guided them through the chaos of buyers and sellers with confident ease. The cattle sold for $940, even better than their most optimistic projections. The buyer was impressed with their condition, commenting that whoever had managed these animals knew what they were doing. Eleanor felt pride swell in her chest at Jonas's quiet, "That would be Miss Grant. She's the owner and primary manager." The buyer's eyebrows had risen, clearly not expecting the owner to be a young woman, but he'd tipped his hat respectfully and paid in full. Eleanor held the bank draft in her hands like it was made of gold, this proof that she could do what she'd claimed, turn the ranch into a profitable operation. "First thing we do is make that payment to the bank," she told Jonas as they left the stockyard. "Show Morrison and the board we're serious about the repayment plan." "First thing we do is get you a decent meal and a real bed for the night," Jonas countered. "Then tomorrow we make the payment, purchase winter supplies, and head home." Home. The word sent a warm flutter through Eleanor's chest. The ranch had become home, more truly than Philadelphia had ever been. That house with its rough floors and simple furniture, that land with its challenges and possibilities, that was where she belonged now. They spent the evening walking through Denver's streets, and Eleanor was struck by how foreign it all felt. The fine dresses and carefully coiffed hair of city women seemed absurd compared to her practical trail clothes. The shops full of luxury goods held no appeal. She found herself eager to return to Silver Ridge, to the ranch, to the life she was building there. "Any regrets?" Jonas asked as they watched the sun set behind the mountains. "About leaving your old life behind?" Eleanor thought about Philadelphia, about the girl she'd been who had worried about social calls and proper tea service. That person seemed like a stranger now, someone from a story she'd once read rather than her own life. "None," she said firmly. "That life was dying long before I left it. My father's illness, losing everything, it was all falling apart anyway. Coming here, fighting for the ranch, it gave me something I never had back east." "What's that?" "Purpose. Choice. The feeling that what I do matters, that I'm building something rather than just maintaining appearances." She looked up at him, finding his eyes warm and understanding. "Back in Philadelphia, I was playing a role. Dutiful daughter, proper lady, all the things I was supposed to be. Here, I get to decide who I am." Jonas smiled and pulled her close. "And who are you, Eleanor Grant?" "I'm still figuring that out," she admitted, "but I like who I'm becoming." They returned to Silver Ridge 3 days later, and Eleanor went straight to the bank with her payment. The new deputy assessor, a straight-laced man named Thompson who'd been appointed after Webb's removal, accepted it with professional courtesy and updated her account. Eleanor walked out with a receipt showing her first quarterly payment made in full, proof that she was honoring her commitments. Webb himself was nowhere to be seen. Rumor had it he'd left Silver Ridge shortly after the board meeting, departing before the formal investigation into his conduct could begin. Some said he'd gone to Denver, others claimed he'd headed to California. Eleanor didn't particularly care where he'd gone, only that he was gone, his shadow no longer hanging over her future. "That's one debt addressed," she told Jonas that evening as they reviewed their finances. "But we still owe Morrison for the hay, and we need to purchase breeding stock if we're going to build the herd back up." One step at a time, Jonas pointed to their remaining funds. "We've got enough to get through winter comfortably, with some left over for emergencies. Come spring, we focus on expanding operations. For now, we've earned the right to breathe a little." Breathing turned out to be harder than expected. Eleanor had spent so long in survival mode, fighting from one crisis to the next, that peace felt foreign and slightly dangerous. She found herself looking for threats that didn't exist, worrying about disasters that might never come. "You're doing it again," May said one morning when Eleanor came in for her shortened shift. "That thing where you look like you're waiting for the other shoe to drop." "I can't help it. Everything's been so hard for so long, it feels impossible that it could just..." Work out. May set down the coffee pot and looked at Eleanor seriously. Honey, you've earned this peace. You fought for it, bled for it, nearly broke yourself in half for it. Stop waiting for it to be taken away and start living in it. The words resonated. Eleanor realized she'd been so focused on survival that she'd forgotten to actually live, to enjoy the fruits of her labor. The ranch was hers. Jonas was by her side. The community had accepted her as one of their own. When had that stopped being enough? She started paying attention to small joys she'd been too stressed to notice. The way frost painted the grass silver in the mornings. The satisfaction of a well-cooked meal shared with Jonas by the fire. The sound of cattle lowing in the near pasture, safe and healthy. The view from the porch at sunset, mountains blazing gold and purple against the darkening sky. And she paid attention to Jonas, to the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, to the casual touches that had become more frequent since that night on the porch, to the possibility of a future that was about more than just saving the ranch. They hadn't spoken directly about their relationship since that first kiss, both of them too busy with the drive and its aftermath. But the knowledge hummed between them constantly, changing the quality of their interactions, adding weight to every shared glance and accidental touch. One evening in late November, as the first real snow of winter began to fall, Jonas brought it up directly. "We need to talk," he said, and Eleanor's stomach dropped at the seriousness in his tone. "About what?" "About us. About what happens next." He sat across from her at the kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. "Eleanor, I care for you. More than I've cared for anyone in a long time, maybe ever. But I need to know if this is real for you, or if I was just convenient comfort during a hard time." Eleanor felt her breath catch. "Convenient? Jonas, you've been everything. You believed in me when no one else did. You taught me everything I know about ranching. You stood by me when any reasonable person would have walked away. How could you think you were just convenient? Because you've been through hell, and sometimes people confuse gratitude with deeper feelings." His eyes were guarded. "I need to know what you feel, Eleanor. Really feel, beyond appreciation for my help." She stood, moving around the table to kneel beside his chair. Taking his hands in hers, she looked up at him with complete honesty. "I love you. I don't know exactly when it happened. Maybe that first day when you offered to help save this place. Maybe later when I realized you saw me as capable instead of helpless. But somewhere along the way, you stopped being just my foreman or my partner and became the person I can't imagine my life without." Jonas's expression transformed, guardedness melting into joy and relief. He pulled her up and into his lap, kissing her with a desperation that spoke of his own fears and hopes. "I love you too," he said when they finally broke apart. "God, Eleanor, I've been terrified to say it, terrified you'd tell me I was presuming too much." "You could never presume too much," she assured him, touching his face tenderly. "You've earned every right to be here, to be part of my life. You saved this ranch as much as I did. We saved it together." Jonas held her close. "And now we get to build it together, if that's what you want. Not just as business partners, but as something more." Eleanor's heart was so full it almost hurt. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" "I'm asking if you'll marry me." The words came out in a rush, as if he'd been holding them back for too long. "I know it's fast. I know we've barely had time to catch our breath, but Eleanor, I've never been more certain of anything. I want to build this life with you, officially and completely. I want to wake up every morning knowing you're mine and I'm yours. I want—" She kissed him to stop the flow of words, pouring everything she felt into it. "Yes," she said when they came up for air. "Yes, absolutely yes. I want all of that too." Jonas laughed, the sound bright and free, and Eleanor realized she'd never heard him laugh like that before. He'd always been so serious, so controlled, but now pure joy radiated from him. "We should do it soon," he said, "before winter sets in completely, while travel is still possible. Get Morrison to stand witness, have May there. A small ceremony," Eleanor agreed. "Nothing fancy, just the people who matter." She smiled. "I don't even have a proper dress." "You could wear a feed sack and you'd be the most beautiful bride I've ever seen." Jonas tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "But if you want a new dress, we can afford one now. You've earned some luxury, Eleanor." The thought of having something new, something beautiful that was purely for joy rather than necessity, made Eleanor's throat tight. I'd like that. Something simple but nice. And maybe we could have a small reception at May's. She'd never forgive us if we didn't. May will probably insist on cooking the entire meal herself. Jonas's smile was warm. She's been rooting for us since before we even knew there was an us to root for. They spent the rest of the evening making plans, talking about the future with an ease that would have seemed impossible just months ago. The ranch had given Eleanor a home and a purpose. Jonas had given her love and partnership. Together, they were building something that felt solid and real and lasting. The next morning, Eleanor woke before dawn as usual, but instead of the dread or determination that had characterized her mornings for months, she felt something new, anticipation, not for challenges to overcome, but for life to be lived, for ordinary days made extraordinary by being shared with someone she loved. She found Jonas already in the barn, mucking stalls in the dim light. He looked up when she entered, his smile instantaneous and genuine. "Morning. Thought I'd get a head start on chores." "You always do." Eleanor picked up a pitchfork and joined him. "Jonas, about last night, having second thoughts?" His voice was carefully neutral, but she saw tension in his shoulders. "The opposite. I just wanted to say thank you." At his confused look, she elaborated. "For seeing me. Really seeing me. Not just the desperate girl who showed up with nothing. For believing I could do this before I believed it myself. For giving me time to figure out what I wanted instead of pushing for more before I was ready." Jonas set down his pitchfork and pulled her close, heedless of the barn dust and hay. "You're easy to see, Eleanor. You shine. I just had to wait until you were ready to let that light out." They stood like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other in the quiet of early morning, and Eleanor thought that this simple joy of being held by someone who knew her completely was worth every hardship she'd endured to get here. The weeks leading up to their wedding flew by in a whirl of preparation and ranch work. Eleanor ordered fabric from Denver and sewed her own dress with May's help, creating something simple but elegant in deep cream-colored silk. May insisted on handling all the food, recruiting half the women in town to help prepare a feast that far exceeded what Eleanor had envisioned for a small ceremony. "You gave us something to celebrate," May said when Eleanor protested the elaborate plans. "Let us celebrate properly. God knows this town needs some joy after all the tension with Webb." Morrison agreed to stand as witness, along with Dutch, who declared gruffly that he'd known from the start that Eleanor and Jonas were meant for each other. "Seen it in the way you work together," he said. "Two people who fit like that, it's rare. You're lucky to have found it." Eleanor knew he was right. She'd come to Colorado Territory with nothing, seeking only survival. She'd found so much more: purpose, home, community, and love that felt like it had been waiting for her all along. The ceremony was held on a clear December morning, cold enough that their breath misted in the air, but with the sun bright and warming. They gathered in the ranch house parlor, the room crowded with people who'd supported them through the fight for this land. The local minister, a kindly man named Reverend Davis, performed a simple service that focused on partnership and commitment, on two people choosing to build a life together. Eleanor wore her new dress with a crown of dried wildflowers May had saved from autumn. Jonas wore his best clothes, brushed clean and pressed, looking more nervous than she'd ever seen him. When he took her hands and spoke his vows, his voice shook slightly with emotion. "I promise to stand beside you in all things," he said, "to share your burdens and your joys, to build this life we've started into something lasting and true. You've taught me what courage looks like, Eleanor. Let me spend my life trying to be worthy of yours." Eleanor's own vows came from her heart, unprepared but deeply felt. "I came here lost and alone, and you gave me a place to stand. You saw strength in me I didn't know I had. I promise to keep building this life with you, to face whatever comes with the same partnership that brought us through these hard months. I love you, Jonas. Thank you for waiting until I was ready to say it." When the minister pronounced them married and Jonas kissed her, the room erupted in cheers and applause. May was crying openly. Morrison was grinning widely. Dutch was wiping suspiciously at his eyes. The celebration that followed was exactly what Eleanor had hoped for: joyful, warm, full of laughter and good food and the sense of community she'd found in this rough territory. People told stories about her uncle, sharing memories that painted a picture of the man she'd never really known. They toasted the newlyweds, wished them prosperity and happiness, and stayed well into the evening, transforming the simple ranch house into a place of light and warmth and belonging. As the party finally wound down and the last guest departed, Eleanor and Jonas stood on the porch watching their friends make their way down the road toward town. The stars were brilliant in the clear winter sky, and the mountains rose like sentinels in the moonlight. "Mrs. Hale," Jonas said, testing out the name. "How does it feel?" Eleanor considered. She'd been Eleanor Grant for 23 years, carrying her father's name and the expectations that came with it. Now she was Eleanor Hale, wife to a cowboy, owner of a Colorado ranch, a woman who'd made herself through determination and grit. "It feels right," she said finally, "like the last piece of myself clicking into place. I'm not just someone's daughter anymore or someone's niece. I'm me, Eleanor Hale, rancher, fighter, woman who refused to give up even when giving up was the sensible choice." "Woman who saved herself," Jonas added, pulling her close. "Never forget that, Eleanor. I helped, Morrison helped, May helped, but you did the saving. You're the one who fought when anyone else would have run. This ranch, this life, you built it." She leaned into him, drawing warmth from his solid presence. "We built it, and now we get to live in it, really live, instead of just surviving." She looked up at him, seeing love and pride and promise in his eyes. "What do you think comes next?" "Everything," Jonas said simply. "Spring and planting, summer and harvest, years of building and growing. Children, maybe, if we're blessed. Growing old together on this land, watching it thrive because we refuse to let it die." He smiled. "Whatever comes, we face it together. That's all I need to know." Eleanor thought about the girl who'd stepped off the stagecoach 5 months ago, lost, desperate, clinging to the slim hope that a relative she'd never met might offer refuge. That girl was gone, transformed by hardship and determination into someone stronger, someone capable of standing in the face of threats and saying no, of fighting for what mattered even when the odds were impossible. She'd lost so much to get here: her father, her old life, the person she'd been raised to be. But in losing all of that, she'd found something more valuable: herself, her strength, her purpose. And she'd found Jonas, a partner in the truest sense, someone who saw her completely and loved what he saw. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For being here. For that first day when you didn't send me away, when you offered to help even though it made no practical sense. For every day after, every moment of teaching and patience and faith. For loving me." Jonas's arms tightened around her. "Thank you for letting me, for seeing past the rough edges to what I could offer, for trusting me with your dreams and your heart." He kissed the top of her head. "I promise I'll spend every day trying to deserve that trust." They stood like that as the night deepened, wrapped in each other, and the profound peace of knowing they were exactly where they belonged. The ranch stretched around them, land they'd fought for and won, land they would nurture and protect and pass on someday to the next generation. Inside the house, the fire burned low in the hearth, casting warm shadows on walls that had witnessed so much struggle and now held the promise of joy. The cedar bench her uncle had built still sat on the porch, weathered by time and elements, a silent witness to the transformation that had taken place here. Eleanor Grant had come to Colorado Territory seeking only survival, a place to land when she had nowhere else to go. She'd found a fight worth fighting, a purpose worth pursuing, and in the process she'd discovered who she truly was beneath all the expectations and limitations that had defined her old life. Now she was Eleanor Hale, and her story was just beginning. The hardest battles were behind her, but the richest rewards lay ahead. Seasons of work and growth, years of partnership and love, a lifetime of building something meaningful on this land that had tested her and found her worthy. As Jonas led her inside to begin their first night as husband and wife, Eleanor looked back one last time at the mountain silhouetted against the star-bright sky. She'd arrived at dusk, lost and alone. She'd fought through the darkness, refusing to surrender even when surrender seemed inevitable. And now she stood in the light of a future she'd created with her own hands, her own courage, her own stubborn refusal to give up on what mattered. The journey from that first frightened moment off the stagecoach to this peaceful joy had been brutal and beautiful in equal measure. But every step had been worth it to arrive here, at home, at peace, at the beginning of everything she'd been seeking without knowing what she sought. The ranch was saved, her place in this territory secured, and beside her stood a man who would walk through fire for her as she would for him. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Winter settled over the ranch like a blanket, transforming the landscape into something both beautiful and unforgiving. Eleanor woke on their first morning as husband and wife to find Jonas already gone from their bed, out checking on the cattle before full light. She dressed quickly in the cold air and joined him, unwilling to let him shoulder the work alone even on this morning after their wedding. He looked up from breaking ice on the water trough and smiled, that warm expression that still made her heart skip. "You should be resting. Yesterday was a long day." So was every day before it. Marriage doesn't change the fact that cattle need tending. Eleanor grabbed a hammer and helped him clear the frozen water. "Besides, I thought we agreed. Partners in everything." "Partners in everything," Jonas echoed, pulling her in for a quick kiss that tasted like cold air and promise. "Though I reserve the right to occasionally insist you rest when you're running yourself ragged." "Only if I get the same right," Eleanor countered, and they both laughed, the sound bright in the winter morning. The months that followed tested them in new ways. Winter in the Colorado Territory proved as harsh as everyone had warned, with temperatures dropping so low that Eleanor thought she'd never feel warm again. They lost 2 calves to cold despite their best efforts, and Eleanor cried over the small frozen bodies, feeling like she'd failed them somehow. "This is ranching," Jonas said gently, holding her as she wept. "You do everything right, and sometimes nature takes what it wants anyway. It's not your fault, Eleanor. It's just the way of things out here." She knew he was right, but the losses still hurt. Every animal represented investment, effort, hope for the future. She'd become attached to the herd in ways she hadn't anticipated, learning their individual personalities, worrying over each one like they were pets rather than livestock. But the ranch also brought unexpected joys that winter. Evenings by the fire with Jonas, reading aloud from books May lent them, while snow piled against the windows. Teaching Jonas to play the card games her father had taught her, laughing when he proved surprisingly competitive. The simple pleasure of cooking meals together in the warm kitchen, working side by side in comfortable silence. And there were the neighbors, checking in on each other as winter deepened. Morrison stopped by regularly, always with some excuse about needing to borrow a tool or return something, but really just making sure they had what they needed. May sent food whenever someone was heading out their direction, claiming she'd made too much and it would just go to waste. "People take care of their own out here," Jonas explained when Eleanor marveled at the community support. "Winter's hard enough without facing it alone. We help each other survive." Eleanor had never experienced anything like it in Philadelphia, where neighbors had been cordial but distant, where help came with expectations of repayment and social obligation. Here, it was simpler, more honest. You helped because it was right, because next winter it might be you who needed the help. She tried to contribute in her own ways, using skills from her old life in this new context. When Morrison mentioned his accounts were a mess, she offered to help organize them. When May struggled with correspondence to suppliers, Eleanor wrote the letters in her careful hand. Small things, but they mattered, weaving her more firmly into the fabric of the community. January brought a crisis that tested everything they'd built. A winter storm hit with unexpected fury, temperatures plummeting and snow falling so thick they couldn't see the barn from the house. Jonas went out to check the cattle and didn't return when expected. Eleanor waited 15 minutes, then 30, fighting rising panic. Finally, she bundled herself in every warm thing she owned and ventured into the storm, following the rope Jonas had strung from house to barn for exactly this kind of situation. She found him in the barn, pinned under a beam that had given way under the weight of snow on the roof. He was conscious, but in obvious pain, his leg trapped at an angle that made Eleanor's stomach turn. "Don't panic," he said through gritted teeth. "Need you to think clearly, Eleanor. Can you do that?" She wanted to scream, to cry, to rage at the universe for throwing one more crisis at them. Instead, she took a deep breath and nodded. Tell me what to do. Get Morrison. Can't lift this alone, and I think my leg's broken. He grimaced as he tried to shift. Follow the road markers. Don't try to cut across country in this weather. I'm not leaving you pinned under a beam while I ride for help. Eleanor looked in the fallen timber, assessing. We can do this. There's a lever principle. I learned it when we were fixing the barn door. If I can find the right fulcrum point and something to use as a lever. She worked frantically, using tools and boards to create a makeshift lever system. Jonas talked her through it when she doubted herself, his voice steady despite the pain she knew he was in. It took 3 attempts, but finally she managed to lift the beam enough for Jonas to drag himself free. His leg was definitely broken, the bone mercifully not protruding, but the swelling and unnatural angle unmistakable. Eleanor fashioned a splint from boards and rope, her hands shaking but her mind clear. Then she half-carried, half-dragged Jonas back to the house, following the rope through the blinding snow. Getting him into bed, she stoked the fire high and wrapped him in every blanket they owned. I'm going for the doctor now. Eleanor, no. The storm's too dangerous. You can't ride in this. Jonas grabbed her hand. I'll be fine until morning. The splint will hold. You need proper medical care. What if there's internal damage? What if... Her voice cracked. What if you get lost in a whiteout and freeze to death trying to save me? Jonas pulled her down to sit beside him. I need you alive more than I need a doctor tonight. Please, Eleanor. Wait until morning. I'm not going anywhere. She wanted to argue, but she could see he was right. The storm was too fierce, visibility too poor. Riding to town now would be suicide. So she sat with him through the long night, monitoring his fever, adjusting his splint, talking to keep him conscious and engaged when exhaustion tried to pull him under. Tell me about Philadelphia, Jonas said around midnight, his voice weak but clear. The good parts. What do you miss? Eleanor thought about it, surprised to realize how little she missed about her old life. The library? My father used to take me every Saturday. Thousands of books. All that knowledge just waiting to be discovered. She smiled at the memory. I used to think I'd read them all someday. We could get books sent from Denver. Start our own library here. Jonas squeezed her hand. What else? Music. There was a concert hall that did performances every month. My mother loved Mozart. Eleanor's throat tightened. She would have liked you, I think. She always said the measure of a man was how he treated people when he had nothing to gain from kindness. You've been kind to everyone, Jonas, even when it cost you. Your mother sounds like she was wise. Jonas's eyes were drifting closed. Eleanor, if something happens, nothing's going to happen. You're going to be fine. And in the morning, I'm getting the doctor, and in a few weeks, you'll be back on your feet complaining about how I'm coddling you. She said it fiercely, willing it to be true. But if it doesn't, no. Eleanor's voice broke. I didn't fight this hard to build this life just to lose you now. You don't get to give up, Jonas Hale. You promised me everything, remember? Years of building and growing, children maybe, growing old on this land. You promised, and I'm holding you to it. Jonas managed a weak smile. Yes, ma'am. Wouldn't dream of breaking a promise to you. Dawn came finally, the storm clearing as quickly as it had arrived. Eleanor left Jonas sleeping fitfully and rode for town through snow that came up to Daisy's chest in places. The doctor, a competent man named Brennan, returned with her immediately, examining Jonas with practiced efficiency. Clean break? Well splinted, he pronounced. Whoever set this knew what they were doing. He'll need to stay off it for 6 weeks minimum, but he should heal fine. Relief flooded through Eleanor so powerfully she had to sit down. 6 weeks. We can manage 6 weeks. You'll have to, Dr. Brennan said bluntly. Any weight on this leg before it's healed properly, and he could end up with a permanent limp or worse. I'm serious, Mrs. Hale. Complete rest. Eleanor nodded, already calculating what this meant for the ranch operations. She'd have to handle everything alone, the cattle, the repairs, all the heavy work Jonas normally did. For 6 weeks in the dead of winter. It seemed impossible, but then again, so had everything else she'd accomplished. Morrison arrived that afternoon, having heard about the accident from Dr. Brennan. I'll send Dutch over daily to help with the heavy work, he said without preamble. And I've got two hands who can rotate through, handle whatever needs doing that you can't manage alone. Tom, I can't ask you to... You're not asking, I'm telling. Morrison's expression was firm. This is what community means, Eleanor. Jonas would do the same if our positions were reversed. You know he would. She did know it. So she accepted the help with as much grace as she could muster, learning once again that strength sometimes meant knowing when to let others carry you. The next 6 weeks were among the hardest of Eleanor's life. She rose before dawn and worked until exhaustion forced her to bed, managing the ranch with help from Morrison's hands, but shouldering most of the responsibility herself. Jonas chafed at his confinement, frustrated by his inability to help, worried about the burden falling on Eleanor. I can do some things from bed, he insisted, mending tack, planning spring operations, keeping the books. You can rest and heal, Eleanor interrupted firmly. Dr. Brennan was clear. Complete rest means complete rest. She softened, sitting beside him. Jonas, you've carried me through so much. Let me carry you through this, please. So he did, though it clearly cost him. And Eleanor discovered reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed. She learned to manage alone, to make decisions without consultation, to trust her own judgment even when doubt whispered. The ranch didn't just survive those 6 weeks. It thrived, because Eleanor refused to let it do otherwise. May commented on the transformation one morning when Eleanor came in for her brief shift. You've changed again, gotten harder maybe, but in a good way. Like you've finally stopped questioning whether you belong here and just accepted it as fact. Eleanor considered this as she poured coffee. I think you're right. I spent so long trying to prove I could do this, trying to earn my place. But somewhere in the last few weeks, I stopped trying to prove anything. I just did what needed doing. And I realized I don't need anyone's permission or approval to be who I am. That's wisdom talking, May said approvingly. Took me 20 years to learn that lesson. You got there in less than one. When Jonas was finally cleared to walk again, his first act was to pull Eleanor into his arms and hold her for a long moment. I watched you these past weeks, he said quietly. Watched you run this entire operation alone, never complaining, never faltering. I knew you were strong, Eleanor, but seeing it day after day, his voice caught. I'm in awe of you. I just did what had to be done, Eleanor said, but she was pleased by his words. Same as you would have. No, I would have accepted more help, delegated more. You drove yourself into the ground rather than show any weakness. Jonas pulled back to look at her seriously. That strength is incredible, but promise me something. Promise you'll let people help when you need it. You don't have to do everything alone anymore. It was a lesson Eleanor was still learning, but she nodded. I promise to try. Spring came late that year, snow lingering well into March. But when it finally arrived, it transformed the ranch into something beautiful. Green grass pushed up through the melting snow, wildflowers appeared in unexpected places, and the cattle grew sleek and healthy on the improving forage. Eleanor and Jonas threw themselves into spring work with renewed energy. They expanded the herd with breeding stock purchased from Morrison at favorable terms. They repaired winter damage to fences and buildings. They planted a kitchen garden behind the house, Eleanor's first attempt at growing food, and watched with delight as seedlings pushed up through the dark soil. This could actually work, Eleanor said one evening as they surveyed their land. The cattle grazed peacefully, the barn stood straight and strong, the house looked cared for and loved. Not just survive, but really work, become the prosperous operation Uncle William dreamed of. It already is working, Jonas pointed out. We made all our payments to the bank. The herd's growing. We're not just surviving anymore, Eleanor. We're building something lasting. She thought about that word. Lasting. 6 months ago, she'd been focused on immediate survival, on making it through each day. Now she could think in terms of years, decades even, of the ranch passing someday to children they might have, of legacy and continuity. I want to put up a marker, she said suddenly, for Uncle William. Something to remember him by, to acknowledge what he started here. They chose a spot on a rise overlooking the ranch, a place with a view of the mountains and the valley. Jonas carved a simple wooden cross, and Eleanor added a plaque with her uncle's name and dates, along with a single line. He built from nothing and never gave up. Standing there at the grave marker, Eleanor felt a profound connection to the uncle she'd never really known. He'd struggled and failed in many ways, but he'd also persevered, creating something from raw land and determination. She was his legacy, carrying forward what he'd started, proving that his dream hadn't been in vain. "Thank you," she whispered to the wind, "for giving me a place to land, for starting something I could finish, for teaching me, even in death, that giving up isn't the only option." Jonas's hand found hers, steady and warm. They stood together in silence, honoring the man whose failures and triumphs had made their success possible. Summer brought prosperity beyond what Eleanor had dared hope. The cattle thrived, their numbers growing with healthy calves. The garden produced abundantly, more vegetables than they could eat, so Eleanor learned to can and preserve, filling shelves with jars of food for winter. Morrison connected them with other ranchers, and Jonas's reputation for quality stock began to spread. Money remained tight, but there was enough now. Enough for necessities, enough for modest improvements, enough to breathe without constant panic. Eleanor no longer lay awake at night, calculating whether they could afford next month's supplies. The constant crisis mode she'd lived in for so long began to ease, replaced by something that felt almost like security. May noticed, of course. "You look happy," she commented one morning. "Really happy. Not just, I'm surviving another day happy." Eleanor realized it was true. Somewhere between crisis and recovery, between fighting and building, she'd found genuine contentment. "I didn't think I would be," she admitted. "After losing my parents, losing everything, I thought maybe happiness wasn't something I got to have anymore. But this life, this ranch, Jonas, it's better than anything I left behind." "That's because you built it yourself," May said wisely. "Things given to us are nice, but things we earn with our own hands and hearts, those are what matter. You didn't just inherit this ranch, Eleanor. You saved it, transformed it, made it yours through sheer stubborn determination. That means something." As summer deepened, Eleanor found herself thinking about the future in new ways. She and Jonas talked late into warm evenings about expansion plans, about possibly breeding horses in addition to cattle, about slowly building the ranch into something even larger than her uncle had achieved. But they also talked about family, about children, about the legacy they wanted to create beyond just land and livestock. Eleanor wasn't pregnant yet, but they both hoped it would happen in time. The thought of children running through the ranch house, learning to ride and rope and love this land as they did, it felt right, like the natural next chapter of the story they were writing. "My mother would have loved this place," Eleanor said one night as they sat on the porch, watching stars emerge. "She loved my father's garden in Philadelphia, spent hours tending flowers. But this," she gestured at the wild landscape, "this would have amazed her. All this space, all of this possibility." "Tell me about her," Jonas said. "I know you've mentioned her, but I want to really know. What was she like?" So Eleanor told him stories she hadn't thought about in years. Her mother's laugh, her gentle wisdom, her strength in facing her own death with grace, the way she'd taught Eleanor to find beauty in small things, to value character over appearance, to never let others define her worth. "She sounds remarkable," Jonas said when Eleanor finished. "You're like her, I think. That same strength wrapped in gentleness, that same refusal to be diminished by hardship." "I hope so. I hope I'm making her proud." Eleanor's voice caught. "Both my parents. They gave me everything they had to prepare me for life, even if it wasn't the life any of us expected." "They'd be proud," Jonas said with certainty. "Look at what you've built, Eleanor. Look at who you've become. Any parent would be honored to claim you." The words healed something in Eleanor she hadn't realized was still wounded. She'd spent so long feeling like she'd failed her parents by losing everything they'd built, by leaving their world behind. But maybe she'd honored them more completely by using what they'd taught her to build something new, something lasting in a place they'd never seen. August brought news that changed everything. Eleanor had been feeling tired and unwell for weeks, dismissing it as the effects of hard work and summer heat. But when she missed her monthly courses for the second time, she went to see Dr. Brennan, hope and fear warring in her chest. "You're pregnant," he confirmed, his expression warm. "About 8 weeks along, I'd estimate." Congratulations, Mrs. Hale. Eleanor walked out of his office in a daze. Pregnant. She was going to have a baby. She and Jonas were going to be parents. The news was overwhelming, terrifying, and absolutely wonderful all at once. She found Jonas mending fence on the north pasture and just blurted it out. I'm pregnant. He dropped his hammer, staring at her. We're... A grin split his face, pure joy radiating from him. Eleanor, we're going to have a baby. He swept her up and spun her around, both of them laughing and crying at once. When he finally set her down, his hands cradled her face tenderly. This is everything, he said. Everything I didn't know I wanted until I met you. A family, a real family, here on this land we've built together. I'm scared, Eleanor admitted. What if something goes wrong? What if I can't do this? You can do anything, Jonas said with absolute conviction. You've proven that 100 times over. You'll be an amazing mother, Eleanor. Our child is going to be so lucky to have you. They told their friends that evening at May's, and the celebration that erupted was immediate and enthusiastic. May hugged Eleanor so tight she could barely breathe, already planning menus for after the baby came. Morrison shook Jonas's hand with genuine warmth, offering advice about balancing ranching with fatherhood. Dutch produced a bottle of whiskey he'd been saving and insisted everyone toast the new generation of ranchers being born into the territory. This is what it's all about, Morrison said, raising his glass. Building something that lasts beyond us. Your child will grow up on land you saved and restored, learning values you'll teach. That's legacy, Eleanor. That's what makes all the hard work worth it. As autumn approached again, Eleanor found herself reflecting on everything that had changed in just over a year. She'd arrived in Silver Ridge lost and desperate, with nothing but a dead man's legacy and fading hope. Now she stood on her own land, married to a man who loved her completely, carrying their child, surrounded by a community that had become family. The ranch that had seemed like a last desperate chance had become home in the truest sense. Every fence she'd mended, every cow she'd tended, every sunrise she'd witnessed from the porch, they'd woven themselves into her identity until she couldn't imagine being anyone other than who she'd become. Jonas noticed her pensive mood one evening and asked about it. I'm just thinking about how much has changed, Eleanor said, resting a hand on her still flat stomach. A year ago, I was alone and terrified. Now I have everything I could want. It seems impossible. Nothing about what we built was impossible, Jonas corrected gently. Improbable, maybe. Difficult, certainly. But never impossible because you refused to accept that as an answer. He was right, Eleanor realized. Every obstacle that had seemed insurmountable, Webb's opposition, the bank's debt, her own inexperience, she'd faced and overcome not through any special advantage, but through sheer refusal to give up. The ranch had been saved not by miracle, but by work, by determination, by the gradual accumulation of small victories that added up to transformation. When autumn came and they took their second cattle drive to market, the results exceeded even their optimistic projections. The herd they'd carefully managed and expanded sold for nearly $1,500, enough to make their next payment and still have a cushion for the coming winter. The buyer recognized Jonas from the previous year and commented on the obvious improvement in their operation. You've built something solid here, he said, counting out payment. Word's spreading about your stock. You keep this up, you'll have buyers coming to you instead of the other way around. Riding back from Denver, Eleanor and Jonas were both quiet, processing what they'd achieved. They'd done it. Really done it. The ranch was not only saved but thriving, poised to grow into something substantial. The impossible dream she'd clung to that first desperate day had become tangible reality. What are you thinking? Jonas asked as they crested the last hill before home. I'm thinking about that bench, Eleanor said. The one on the porch that Uncle William built. I was sitting there the first time we really talked. Remember? I was almost out of hope, ready to give up. And you said the place wasn't lost yet. I remember. You looked like a ghost, all pale and scared, but there was something in your eyes that told me you were stronger than you looked. I sat on that bench so many times over the past year. Every time things got hard, every time I wanted to quit, I'd sit there and look at the land and remember that first conversation. The bench became like a promise to myself, that I wouldn't give up, wouldn't let this place be lost. Jonas reached over and took her hand. It's not lost. It never will be. Not as long as we're here to protect it. Winter came again, but this time Eleanor faced it without fear. They were prepared, supplies stocked, animals protected, the house weatherproofed and cozy. And Eleanor carried life within her pregnancy advancing as snow piled outside. Dr. Brennan visited regularly despite the weather, checking on both mother and child, pronouncing both healthy and strong. May had essentially adopted Eleanor, fussing over her diet and rest, insisting she cut back on ranch work as her belly grew. Eleanor chafed at the restrictions but accepted them, knowing her primary job now was protecting the child she carried. Jonas was endlessly solicitous, wrapping her in blankets, bringing her tea, doing double work to spare her any strain. "I can still contribute," Eleanor protested one day when he physically blocked her from lifting a heavy pot. "I'm pregnant, not an invalid." "I know, but you're carrying our child, and that's the most important work there is right now." His hand covered hers on her rounded stomach. "Let me take care of you, Eleanor. You've been strong for so long. Let me be strong for you now." So she did, learning yet another lesson in accepting help, in understanding that strength sometimes meant letting others carry the burden. And as her pregnancy advanced and movement became more difficult, she was grateful for his care, for the way he anticipated her needs before she voiced them. Spring arrived with mud and rain and the promise of new life. Eleanor's due date approached as the land greened and the cattle began to calve. May moved into the ranch house for the final weeks, determined to be there when the baby came. Morrison checked in daily. Even Dutch appeared with a hand-carved cradle he'd spent the winter making, gruff and embarrassed when Eleanor cried over its beauty. "Just figured the little one should have something proper to sleep in," he muttered. "Ranch babies need sturdy furniture." Eleanor went into labor on a warm April evening, with the windows open and the sound of spring rain falling soft outside. May sent Jonas for Dr. Brennan while she stayed with Eleanor, coaching her through the early contractions with the confidence of someone who'd assisted with dozens of births. "You've survived everything else life threw at you," May said firmly, as another contraction hit. "You'll survive this too. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. Your body knows what to do." Labor proved long and difficult, testing Eleanor's endurance in new ways. But through the pain and exhaustion, she held on to the image of her child, the new life she and Jonas had created together. When Jonas returned with Dr. Brennan, his presence gave her renewed strength. He held her hand through the worst of it, murmuring encouragement, his face pale but determined. Finally, as dawn broke over the mountains, Eleanor's daughter entered the world with a furious cry that announced her displeasure at being evicted from her comfortable home. Dr. Brennan placed the tiny, perfect infant on Eleanor's chest, and Eleanor felt her heart expand in ways she hadn't known were possible. "A girl," she whispered, touching her daughter's downy head with shaking fingers. "Jonas, we have a daughter." Jonas was crying unashamedly, looking at his wife and child with awe. "She's perfect. You're both perfect. Eleanor, you did it." They named her Sarah, after Jonas's mother and the aunt Eleanor had never met. Sarah Hale, born on a ranch her mother had saved through determination and her father had helped restore through loyalty. Sarah, who would grow up knowing this land, learning to love it as they did, carrying the legacy forward into a future that suddenly seemed limitless. The weeks after Sarah's birth passed in a blur of sleepless nights and overwhelming love. Eleanor had thought she understood devotion before, but holding her daughter, watching her tiny features shift and change, feeling that absolute bond, it redefined everything. This was what she'd been fighting for all along, she realized. Not just land or survival, but this: family, continuity, love that extended beyond herself. Jonas proved to be a natural father, endlessly patient with Sarah's demands, happy to walk her for hours when she was fussy, content to simply sit and watch her sleep with an expression of wonder. "I can't believe she's ours," he said one night as they watched Sarah sleeping in the cradle Dutch had made. "That we made something this perfect." "She's going to grow up so differently than I did," Eleanor mused. "No city life, no social constraints. She'll learn to ride before she learns to read, probably. She'll know how to doctor cattle and mend fences and stand up for herself." "She'll learn all that from watching you," Jonas said. "You'll teach her what strength really looks like." Not the kind that comes from never being tested, but the kind that comes from being broken and choosing to rebuild stronger. As spring turned to summer, life settled into new rhythms. Eleanor managed the ranch work around caring for Sarah, learning to balance motherhood with all her other responsibilities. It was exhausting, demanding, sometimes overwhelming, and absolutely worth it. May continued to visit regularly, bringing food and wisdom in equal measure. Morrison stopped by to see the little rancher, as he called Sarah, and to check on the operation. The ranch continued to prosper, the herd growing, the land responding to careful management. One warm June evening, as the sun painted the mountains gold, Eleanor sat on the cedar bench with Sarah in her arms and Jonas beside her. The bench where she'd sat so many times in despair and hope, in exhaustion and determination. The bench that had witnessed her transformation from lost city girl to confident rancher, from desperate heir to successful owner. "Your great-uncle William made this bench," she told Sarah, even though the baby couldn't possibly understand. "He built it with his own hands. From wood he cut himself. It survived storms and snow and time, kind of like this ranch, kind of like us." Jonas's arm came around her shoulders. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking about waiting," Eleanor said softly. "About all the times I sat on this bench waiting for something, for help to arrive, for solutions to appear, for hope to return. I spent so much time waiting at dusk that in between time when you can't quite see the future but the day is ending, I thought the darkness would swallow everything. But it didn't. No, because I kept waiting, kept believing that tomorrow might bring something better. And it did, Jonas. You wrote in that day when I'd almost given up completely. You came back with those men and that paper that saved the ranch. Every time I thought it was over, something or someone arrived just in time." She looked at her husband, at her daughter, at the land spreading before them. "I don't think I really understood it until now. Waiting isn't passive, it's active hope, the choice to believe in possibility even when everything looks impossible. That's what this bench represents. The courage to keep waiting, to keep believing, even when dusk falls and darkness seems certain." Jonas kissed her temple. "You weren't just waiting, though. You were working, fighting, building. You made your own hope." "Maybe. But I also learned to accept help, to let others care for me, to trust that I wasn't alone." Eleanor smiled at Sarah, who was dozing in her arms. "That's what I want to teach her. To be strong, yes, but also to know when to wait for help, when to accept support, when to trust in community and connection." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dropped lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The cattle lowed in the distance. The wind whispered through the cottonwoods her uncle had planted decades ago. Everything was peaceful, settled, right in ways Eleanor had stopped believing were possible. "Do you ever regret it?" Jonas asked quietly. "Leaving Philadelphia, coming here, all the hardship you endured?" Eleanor didn't even have to think about it. "Never. Not for 1 second. That life was killing me slowly, not through cruelty, but through emptiness. I was playing a role following a script someone else had written. Here, I get to write my own story. We're writing it together." "And what a story it is." Jonas stood, carefully taking Sarah from Eleanor's arms. "Come on, let's go inside. I'll make supper while you rest." "I can help. I know you can. But you don't have to. Not tonight. Tonight, just rest. Be present. Enjoy what we've built." Eleanor stood, stretching muscles that were finally starting to remember what it felt like to not be in constant crisis mode. She followed Jonas into the house, pausing at the door to look back one more time at the bench, at the land, at the mountains standing eternal against the darkening sky. She thought about that first evening in Silver Ridge, standing alone and terrified on the dusty street. She thought about learning her uncle was dead, about facing Webb in his bank, about every impossible obstacle that had seemed guaranteed to crush her dreams. She thought about all the times she'd sat on that bench at dusk, exhausted and scared, waiting for hope to return. And here she was, alive, thriving, surrounded by love, with a ranch that was finally and truly hers, with a family she'd built from nothing but determination and faith. The waiting had been worth it. Every tear, every setback, every moment of despair, all worth it to arrive at this moment of profound peace and belonging, Years would pass, Eleanor knew. Sarah would grow, perhaps joined by siblings. The ranch would continue to evolve, seasons rolling by in their endless cycle. There would be challenges ahead. There always were. Hard winters and dry summers, market fluctuations and unexpected crises. Life would test them again and again, but they would face it together, the family they'd chosen to become, on the land they'd fought to keep. And someday, when Sarah was old enough to understand, Eleanor would tell her the whole story. About arriving at dusk with nothing, about refusing to give up even when giving up seemed inevitable, about the power of waiting with active hope instead of passive despair. She would tell Sarah about the bench where her mother had learned what strength really meant. Not the absence of fear or doubt, but the choice to keep going despite both. The choice to sit and wait at dusk, believing that dawn would come, trusting that the darkness was temporary even when it felt eternal. And she would teach Sarah that home isn't something you're born into, but something you build with your own hands and heart. That belonging is earned through showing up every day, through contributing to community, through refusing to let hardship define your story. That love, real, lasting love, comes from partnership and shared struggle, from choosing each other over and over in the face of adversity. All the lessons Eleanor had learned in this harsh, beautiful territory, she would pass on to her daughter. And Sarah would grow up knowing that she came from strength, that she was the daughter of a woman who'd faced impossible odds and won through sheer stubborn determination. The ranch would be Sarah's inheritance, but more than that, she would inherit the story of how it was saved. The knowledge that her mother had arrived with nothing and built everything. The understanding that sometimes you have to lose yourself completely to discover who you really are. Eleanor stepped inside the warm house, where Jonas was humming as he prepared supper and Sarah was sleeping peacefully in her cradle. The lamp cast golden light across the simple furniture, the clean floors, the walls that sheltered them from the wild country outside. This was home. This was the life she'd fought for and won. This was everything she'd been seeking when she stepped off that stagecoach, even though she hadn't known it then. She'd come to Colorado Territory seeking survival and found so much more: purpose, love, community, identity. She'd arrived as Eleanor Grant, lost daughter of a dead banker, and became Eleanor Hale, rancher, wife, mother, woman who'd saved herself and discovered who she truly was in the process. The bench on the porch would remain there for decades, weathering through seasons and years, a silent witness to the transformation that had taken place here. Future generations would sit on it, perhaps never knowing the full story of the woman who'd sat there so many times at dusk, waiting for hope to ride in on horseback. But Eleanor would know, and Jonas would know. And they would remember always the power of refusing to give up, of choosing to wait and work and hope, even when darkness seemed certain. The girl who'd arrived at dusk was gone, replaced by a woman who'd learned to trust in dawn. And as Eleanor moved through her house, checking on her sleeping daughter, smiling at her husband, feeling the weight of this life she'd built settling around her like a blessing, she understood finally that this was what happiness looked like. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of purpose. Not perfect days, but meaningful ones. Not ease, but the satisfaction of having earned every single thing she had through her own courage and determination. The ranch was saved. The family was thriving. The future stretched ahead, full of possibility and promise. And Eleanor Hale, who'd once been Eleanor Grant, who'd once been lost and desperate and alone, sat down to supper with her husband and infant daughter in the house she'd fought to keep, on the land she'd refused to lose, in the territory that had tested her and found her worthy. She'd waited at dusk, and dawn had come, bringing everything she'd hoped for, and more than she'd dared to dream. And as the stars emerged over the Colorado mountains and peace settled over the ranch like a blanket, Eleanor finally let herself fully believe in the permanence of what she'd built. This was home. This was family. This was the life she'd created from ashes and determination and stubborn, beautiful hope. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything.